Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to nearly intone the way that the 5-minute warning and 1-minute warning will, but I'll hope to grab your attention anyways. So I'm Rob Doyle. I work in the stakeholder engagement team here at the IESO, and it's really my pleasure to welcome you here to the Electricity Summit of 2018. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers who have come in for today from all across North America, different parts of the United States and Canada. And thank you to all of you, because with all of you here, that means I can come and say that our summit was sold out this year. So thank you very much for that. I'll be your MC today. So as part of being your MC, I get to do a few administrative notes for you. And the first one of that is that we want you to participate in the discussion today. So we don't want this to be us talking at you, but we want it to be a forum where you're participating as well. So we're going to do that in one of two ways. The first way that we're going to do that is a couple stationary mics in the room here. So for you brave souls who will want to come up and use those, you can. The other way that we want you to participate is through an online platform called Slido. And through this platform, you have in your discussion guide and on your tables just ways to connect right now. So what I'm going to do right now is ask you to say, okay, I know it's early, it's just after 8:30, but can you grab your phones for a second? Can we learn how to do Slido together? Can we do that? I saw a couple phones come out, which is hopefully a good thing. So what I'd love for you to do is just to kind of log into Slido right now. Slido.com, and then we have a hashtag, which is 2018 Summit, which I'd love you to put into your phone, and we're going to have a question loaded up in Slido, and that question is going to say, what do you represent? What sector do you represent? So I'd love for you, and this is an active poll, so that we're able to see that. Generator wins. They got in there first, so let's see who else is in the room. So while these results are loading up, just a couple of administrative notes for you. We have a photographer on site who's going to be taking some pictures for collateral for some of the work that we do at the IESO. If you are not comfortable with your face appearing in any IESO collateral, could you just let the registration desk know? And we'll take a picture of you, just kidding. But just leave your name with them, and we'll make sure that you are not included in anything. Second, in case of emergency, there are all the doors around us, so please make your way in an orderly fashion so that we can exit the ballroom if the alarm does go off. And if you do require assistance, please flag that to the Sheridan Center staff here. So last thing, and I'm pleased to report that this is the last thing that you've already done great on. I really need your help today making sure that we stay on time. Making sure that we're kind of back in the room when breaks are done to make sure that we can kind of carry on with what we think is a really great agenda ahead of us. So please, let's work together on that. So with that, I'd now like to turn the podium over to Terry Young, the IESO Vice President of Policy, Engagement, and Innovation, and Terry will officially open up our 2018 Electricity Summit. Terry.
Thanks, Rob, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth annual summit, which we're now calling the Electricity Summit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the change in name in a minute. But before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we're gathered in the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, notably the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation and Six Nations of the Grand River. I'm delighted to see so many people here, so many familiar faces in the audience, as well as so many new ones. I noticed that we had almost 400 registrants for the conference today, and it sort of brings me back to when I started at the IESO, known as the IMO, in 2002. I don't think we had 400 people on any distribution list, let alone getting 400 people in a room like this. So it's great to see the way that electricity opportunities and issues are attracting so many people, both traditional stakeholders and new ones. And so for me, the new people joining us today represent the theme of the day's summit. Unlocking the value of innovation, because innovation means opening up the proverbial tent, if you will, to new ideas, new people, new opportunities, and even new concerns. It's about understanding and preparing for the future we want. It means being agile and adaptable, embracing new opportunities, new technologies, new capabilities, and new participants, ensuring improved energy outcomes for Ontarians. It means opportunities to bring ideas to the table to improve, for example, reliability, cost effectiveness, or even customer service. And for customers, it means more and better tools and insights that help with informed decision making, new opportunities to participate in the sector, and better management of costs. And in the end, it means a more efficient and effective electricity grid. So embracing the opportunities presented with innovation and creating an environment where it can thrive is what the IESO is doing today. And it started internally. As many of you know, last fall, our new CEO and President, Peter Gregg, announced some structural changes to align the organization with the strategic priorities that we have. And while you'll hear more about the new corporate strategy in due course, I can tell you that support for innovation and inclusion is front and center in that strategy. To ensure that we have the people power to back up this commitment, the IESO has a whole new business unit dedicated to advance the innovation agenda. And I have the honor to lead that new policy engagement and innovation group at the IESO. And within PEI, we've created the Innovation Research and Development Department that has a mandate to explore, assess, and prepare for emerging technologies, consumer trends, business models and practices, and policy alternatives with the potential to transform how the IESO does business and to improve energy outcomes for the people of Ontario. We need to make these steps as an organization because the change affecting our sector is radically altering how, when, where, and with whom we do business. As you know, much of this change is driven by the new and innovative approaches to generating, storing, and distributing electricity. And despite recently defining our commitment to innovation in our corporate strategy, it doesn't mean we've been sitting on our hands until now. In fact, in one form or another, the effective integration of new and innovative ways to bring Ontarians more electricity more effectively and efficiently is an important part of the work that's done in almost all part of our organization. We've put out a call to the industry for feedback on the role for non-emitting resources. As well, we're examining how to better accommodate DERs. We've created the Energy Storage Advisory Group that's tasked with examining how to unlock the potential opportunities for storage resources and mitigating, where possible, obstacles that prevent the integration of this resource into the market. Innovation is front and center, even when it comes to our conservation programs. Whether through direct project support or through program delivery, the IESO continues to find new ways to provide better service to sector participants, communities, and stakeholders with innovative engagement and delivery models. The IESO Conservation Fund has the potential to deliver on significant energy savings through its support of innovative conservation technologies, practices, research, and programs, and it's supported innovative projects that demonstrate the energy-saving potential of emerging technologies, leading us towards large-scale transformation in the marketplace and changes in consumer behavior. So you'll see more of this in the upcoming corporate strategy, but what you'll see is that what it is that we're building on and the progress that all of us in the room together have made in driving innovation into our sector. So at the top I mentioned the new annual gathering, previously known as the Stakeholder Summit. Going forward will be known as the Electricity Summit. It's a good change for many reasons. Chief among them is that it better reflects our commitment to inclusion. We know that some of the most important voices that we need to hear don't consider themselves traditional stakeholders, and the discussions we're having about innovation, reliability, and effectiveness and efficiency are just too important not to have everyone's perspective. And while I liked it in the past, we acknowledge in the title the important role of stakeholders in all of the work on the IESO. I know that the new title better reflects what we're trying to accomplish and who we're trying to accomplish that with. I hope that despite the name change, you know that your input is always sought and appreciated. Your feedback is invaluable as we continue to provide Ontarians with a reliable source of electricity now and well into the future. Looks like a great day. A lot of things on the agenda. I think there's a lot of things to get to participate in. We're looking forward to the many discussions that are going to happen, not just in the podium, but outside this room as well. It's an opportune time to have some of those discussions, and I look forward to participating. And with that, I wish everyone a great day. Look forward to your participation, but also your feedback on this. We want to constantly improve, and as we look to next year, we want to understand how we can do things better. So with that, have a great day, and I'll turn the podium back to Rob to get the day started. Thanks very much.
So with that, I'd really like to introduce our first speaker and get our agenda moving along, and that's Patty Durand, who's the president and CEO of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative from Atlanta, Georgia, and that's a role that she's held since 2011. I want to dispense with Patty's formal bio, which you have in your package, and maybe just say that in the lead up to the summit, just so fortunate to have so many conversations with her, going back and forth, and just getting her experience, her insights, and her research into consumer behaviors and drivers. And even as I put my notes on my Kindle this morning, and you can't see this, but it's typewriter keys. So this screen pops up in my house, and I see my kids see that, and they have no concept of what that is. They have no concept of what a typewriter is. So I'm just very interested in Patty's presentation today to talk us through what does today's consumer need. You know, we've gone so far, even in a technology space, since the typewriter and the little black and red bands, ribbons going through there. So Patty's going to take us through today just really where we're going in the future and what consumers are showing us of how we'll get there. Patty?
All right, great. Let me start with a question. Does anyone even know what an electricity consumer wants? Do consumers themselves know what they want? Well, there's an old saying that consumers just want a hot shower and a cold beer, and they don't care much about energy beyond that. And that may be true for some consumers, but that is no longer true for most consumers. Most consumers do care about energy for a variety of reasons, as we'll see. And what I'd like to do today is share with you some of the research that I think will be most relevant to meeting your needs. And what I know about you is that you want to know what are the energy trends going on out there affecting consumers? What are best practices for consumer engagement? And how do you, as an energy wholesaler, help your retail clients grapple with these changes? And if you're a retailer, what are the best practices for consumer engagement? So before I step you through that, let me tell you just a little bit about what we do and how we do it. And so we'll get started with that we are an 8-year-old organization. We were founded in 2010. We are a membership organization, and the majority of our members are utilities, as depicted on the screen. We have 5 times the number of members depicted on the screen. We couldn't fit all the logos in. Besides utilities, we have B2B companies, and we have nonprofits with a focus on energy, particularly consumer advocates, but also energy efficiency advocates, and many other nonprofits like that. Our mission is to advance a consumer-friendly and consumer-safe smart grid, and we do that through market research, market analysis, consumer focus studies, ideation sessions, market surveys, all the market analysis best practices. So in late 2016, we refreshed our flagship research, Consumer Pulse Segmentation Study, to come up with a framework of how consumers view energy, what are their attitudes, what are their values. And the largest segment are green champions at 44%, and the remaining segments range much smaller numbers between 10 and 18%, with saving seekers at 18%, status quo at 13%, technology cautious at 12%, and movers and shakers at 10%. And let me tell you just a little bit more about each of these. And as I go through this, think about yourself. Which segment might you fit in, and where might your friends and family sit in? So first, green champions. They're our youngest segment, but have the highest income despite their youth. They're working, they're college educated, they're early adopters of technology. They attach high importance to new energy technologies, especially reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they have the highest interest in new utility programs. And I think I fit that category, personally. And then there's savings seekers. This group has the largest number of low-income consumers, although not everyone is low income. They care about energy technology only in the degree that it helps them save money. They generally are dissatisfied with their utility. And let me ask you, why do you think that is? Why would this group be unhappy? Just shout out an answer. Let me hear from someone. Okay, that's a good one. Anyone else? Ideas? Growing poverty gap. Well, one of the key reasons this group is unhappy with their utility is that most utilities are not offering them any program specific to fit their needs. And they know it, and they don't like that. They would switch utilities if they had a choice. We always ask that question, even though most consumers can't switch utilities. Most utilities are a monopoly where consumers have no choice. But we like to ask that question just to get a sense of how consumers are feeling about the utility industry. Next up, and for this group, my nieces, I'm very close to my nieces. I'm pretty sure they would fit this segment of consumer. Next up are status quo. This group has the largest number of retirees. They have an average electric bill, which they can afford to pay. They don't know much about energy efficiency and don't think it's important, and they don't attach any importance to smart grid technology. So we generally recommend you leave this group alone. That's what they want, and my mom would fit this category. And then technology cautious. They're the second largest number of low-income households, although not everyone's low income. They tend to be retirees or older and generally not working. And they attach high importance to energy efficiency. They also attach high importance to smart grid technologies, but they don't understand how it works. They don't see how technology can really help them. So this group would be a big educational lift to engage. And I have some friends that fit this category. And then movers and shakers last. This group has a high income. They have the largest electric bill of any segment. They are early adopters of technology. They're working, college educated, and they love new utility programs and would engage in them. But they generally also are unhappy with their utility. This is the second segment that tells us they would switch if they could. So ideas on why this group is unhappy. Just anybody shout it out. Yes, thank you. This group is looking for technology. They're the ones buying the Nest, EVs, rooftop solar. They're going to Best Buy looking for technologies and not finding it with their utility. And so this group would engage if there was something being offered, but for many cases, there isn't anything being offered. So they're having to look elsewhere. So they're not loving their utility for that reason. So let's move on, and let me show you the first commandment of marketing. Actually, let me go back. It's a favorite quote of mine. I want to share with you about why we care about segmentation. So I'd like to show you Dr. Philip Kotler's quote with Northwestern University, and he says, oh wait, that's Justin Trudeau. Sorry about that. Let me get his picture up. There we go. That's what he looks like. The first commandment of marketing is to segment the market, choose the best segments, and develop a strong position in each segment. So why care about marketing and segmentation? Because it helps us to understand the motivations of consumers. And when we understand them, we can meet them. So let me move on to this question for you. Are consumers irrational? I was at an energy conference last year, and a stakeholder in the rooftop solar industry told me that he thinks consumers are irrational. And the reason is because they're installing rooftop solar systems with an 18-year payback, which made no sense to him. Most consumers don't live in their homes for 18 years. There was no way they were going to come out ahead financially. And so I told him, with all due respect, many consumers aren't driven only by money. Maybe consumers installing rooftop solar like new technology. They think it's cool. Or maybe they want to do their part about global warming and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe they would like to rely less on their utility. It could be any number of reasons. Maybe it's several of those reasons. And as soon as I said that, he said, you know, you're right. I hadn't thought of it that way. I was only thinking of it from the perspective of money. But of course, there probably are many reasons consumers would install rooftop solar. So that's another reason it's important to understand what consumers think and want around energy. To that end, let's move on to the State of the Consumer Report. This is a really nice study for you if you are a leader or executive in your organization and you don't need the details around program design or marketing messages. You just want to stay high level and see the trends. This is a good report for you. We do have research that has the details, so if you want to do program design or need help with marketing messages, we have that. But this study is a meta-analysis of our other research. And let me show you what goes into it. We did studies last year. We did a spotlight on millennials. As we know, or maybe you don't know, I didn't know prior to this research, they're now the largest demographic. Not just in the workspace, but at all. They're now the largest demographic. So it's important to know how they differ from other generations. So we did that research. We did a spotlight on renters. Since the recession, renters now make up almost 50% of the marketplace. And prior to the recession, it was something like 35%. And that 50% has stayed steady. It doesn't appear to be changing. So we did a deep dive on renters' views and attitudes and how they can be engaged. And then the consumer pulse and market segmentation study I mentioned, you can see the 5 segments depicted on the cover. That one has a lot of details about the segments, a lot more than I can share with you today. And then in addition to those 3, we did some external inputs into the research because some of these reports added some real value. So we include voices of experience from the Department of Energy. This study focused just on consumers wanting to install rooftop solar, how to engage them, what they were looking for, what worked in the field. And the Empowered Consumer is done by a nonprofit focusing on advocating more access to data for consumers related to smart meters, the smart grid. And then we included some real world field studies on what's worked in consumer engagement. So it's not all theoretical. We have some on-the-ground data. And so those were the inputs into the research. So theme 1, be proactive with your consumers. Start the conversation now. As we know, consumers are comparing their utility to other service providers they interact with. They're not comparing their utility to other utilities. So they're seeing how Amazon works, Uber, Apple, all those guys, and they're finding many times utilities are coming up short. But this is a great opportunity to move forward with digital engagement with your consumers. So the market segmentation study I mentioned reframed the segments into 3 areas of engagement, with green champions being always engaged. And then the next 3 segments, these 3, fall into selectively engaged, which means they engage with their utility only on a periodic basis, only when they need something. So this is a great opportunity to engage these consumers and move them into the more always engaged group. And the status quo, you're not going to engage. So as you can see from the arrow, what we advocate is moving these selectively engaged over to always engaged. And how do you do that? Well, you do that beginning with digital engagement with your utilities. So banking comes in as number 1 for having dramatic changes in digital technology over the past 10 to 20 years. And when we study consumer viewpoints, they're looking at their utility as compared to banking most of all. Of course, they are for the other 3 that I mentioned, Apple, Uber, Lyft, all those guys. But for banking, consumers see them as a utility. Even though we don't really see them as a utility, many consumers view banking as a utility, and they see the changes that banks have made. Like, imagine just 10 years ago, when you needed cash, you went to a bank and saw a teller. Or if you needed to deposit a check, you went to a bank and deposited in person. Now, you can deposit checks with your phone. You can go to a kiosk. You never have to see anyone from a bank. You can move money around in your savings and checking accounts. You can transfer money to other people, all online. So these are the digital changes that consumers are looking for from utilities. So theme 1, State of the Consumer Report, start the conversation now. Next, use an all-the-above strategy for communications. Consumers are online now. They're using digital technology, especially millennials. But most consumers are not using digital technology to look up energy-related information. But millennials, about 1/3 of millennials are. So this is a huge opportunity for consumer engagement to move those other generations into using online access for energy-related information. So what we've done in our studies is ask consumers, how do you contact your utility? And you can see from the green chart, about 58% of consumers use one primary method. And the blue part of the pie, 27% use 2 or more methods. And then the orange part of the pie, 15% use 3 or more. So that's over 40% that use 2 or more channels. So if as a utility you're communicating with your consumer in only one channel, you're missing a huge chunk of consumers. And then we've also studied, we used 11 different contact methods that we asked consumers how do they contact their utility. And we group these into 3 broad methods: digital, telephone, and in person. And what I'd like you to see from this slide is the oldest generation depicted in gray compared to all the other generations, especially millennials depicted in red. And you can see that 80% of consumers, except for the older generations, use digital. That's a huge majority. And then all of the generations use telephone, and then in-person drops off dramatically. But you can see millennials still use more channels than any of the other generations. And so it's important to go where consumers want to go to engage them. So let me ask you a question. How many of you, by show of hands, does your utility offer you a digital platform like a chat box or a retail marketplace for you to go to? Show of hands? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you have a utility that offers a social media platform that communicates with you on Twitter and Facebook? Show of hands. Okay, more. And then how many of you have a retail marketplace where you can buy LED bulbs, lights with energy efficiency ratings, power strips, and that kind of thing? Show of hands. And how many of you aren't going to raise your hand no matter what I say? All right, I saw you. Right. So using all the above channel is very important for consumer engagement. And by the way, those of you that raised your hands were very low. 20% of you raised your hands. So most of you either have a utility that does not offer you any of those channels, or you don't know, joking aside, if they do. So that's a huge communications gap. That's a great opportunity for utilities. Okay, start with the basics. Most consumers don't understand anything about their bill. And this is a great way we advocate to communicate with your customers, to engage them, help them understand their bill. Consumers want options from you, as we've seen. And what I'd like to do now, actually in a second, I forgot this slide was here, promote online billing as a gateway. This is a great opportunity to engage consumers. So you can see 38% of consumers already use online billing, and then 36% are interested, 8% are neutral. If you take the 38 and the 18 together and take them out, that still leaves over 40% of consumers that would use online billing as a gateway. And this is a great opportunity to bring consumers to your website, to enroll in your programs, to enroll in Twitter and Facebook and see what you've got going on with your retail marketplace. Now I'm going to play you a short video by a technology company called Bidgely. And what I want you to look for in this video is how Bidgely and their utility, the utility that's partnering with Bidgely, presents bill basics to this consumer.
Alexa, open my energy assistant.
Hello, I am your personal energy assistant. How may I help you today? You may ask your current usage, projected bill, ways to save, and much more.
What is my current electricity usage?
You have consumed energy worth $80 as of yesterday. Listing usage of top 3 appliances. You have consumed $33 on cooling, $16 on electric vehicle, and $12 on laundry.
What's my projected bill?
Your projected amount for this billing cycle is $135. 12 days are remaining in this bill cycle.
Alexa, why is my bill higher than usual this month?
This month you are estimated to use $55 in cooling. This is a 30% increase compared to the same month last year.
What can I do to reduce my electricity bill?
It looks like your cooling energy usage is 20% more than similar homes. You might try pre-cooling your home to avoid peak period pricing. Would you like me to set up a reminder?
Yes, remind me at 10 a.m. to pre-cool the house.
Okay, I will set that reminder.
Alexa, please set a budget of $100 for my electricity bill.
No problem. I have set a budget of $100 for your electricity usage.
Alexa, can you email me some savings tips?
I would be happy to email you some energy saving tips.
Okay, and the video goes on for another 45 seconds demonstrating those energy savings tips. So what did you think? I think Bidgley did a great job showing consumers understanding and working with the utility on bill basics in a very forward, technology-forward way. So theme 4 of the State of the Consumer Report, put consumers in the driver's seat. Consumers want to be in control. Do some consumers want just hot showers and a cold beer? Maybe, but most consumers want to be in control of their energy usage and their energy data, and they're telling us that. And we're seeing that in a lot of the field work case studies that we've documented. And what I'd like to do now is show you another short video. This one is by SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District in Northern California, very close to the Canadian border. And this video does a nice job showing how consumers can work with the utility to be in control of their bill, and that's what I'd like you to look for.
Looking for a fast, easy way to monitor your electric bill? With SMUD, you can sign up for bill alerts and monitor your energy usage anytime, anywhere. Choose one or all 3 alert options. Take control with the bill threshold alert. You set the amount, and we'll email or text you when you reach it. Try out the mid-bill alert. We'll remind you when you're halfway there. Or select the high bill alert. We'll email you if your usage gets 30% higher than the same time last year. Stay in control of your monthly bill. Sign up for the alerts that suit you best at smud.org/bill-alerts. SMUD, powering forward together.
So what do you think of that one? Again, it's short, it's interesting, and it demonstrates how consumers can take control of their bill. And SMUD is an award-winning utility in the U.S. They have a very high customer satisfaction rate. They piloted a time-of-use program in 2016 and 2017 that was so successful that is one of the reasons the state of California is rolling out mandated time of use beginning in 2019. It's the first state to do so, and a lot of people are seriously worried about how consumers are going to handle it, and SMUD is on the forefront of doing a good job with communicating with consumers around taking control of their energy bill and what's going on with this and other videos and other communications channels they have going on, which I'd love to share with you if you're interested in seeing. Just let me know. So when we study usage data with consumers and we ask them questions about, are you interested in data? Do you want data from your utility on energy, from your smart meter? Nearly 75% of consumers say they do. And so there tends to be a misunderstanding in the energy industry that consumers don't want their data. But actually, we find they do. They've said they do, and when it's interesting and compelling and presented well, they sign up for these programs. So we know they do. Here's an example of a picture of the data-driven society we live in. This is the most famous Rembrandt piece in the world. It's called The Night Watch. It's on display in the Amsterdam Museum, and nobody's looking at it. Everyone's looking at their phone. So you don't think we're in a data-crazy society? How many of you have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or a smartwatch? We probably all do. And so I'm manipulating you a little bit. These consumers were actually told to download the museum app to read more details about this art. And so they weren't actually just ignoring it. In fact, here's those same students looking at another piece of art in the museum, listening to the tour guide very intently. But still, we can believe it. We can believe that consumers want data because we're all on our phone, not just teenagers. In fact, in Atlanta, where I'm from, the governor just signed a bill that says as of July 1st, if you're caught even holding your phone in your car at a red light stopped, you can be fined and given a ticket for a moving violation. And that's because so many fatalities have been increasing related to driver distraction. So those are adults. Those are not teenagers just using their phone like crazy. All of us are too, including while we're driving, and it's a serious issue. So the point being made, we all love data. We're a data-driven society now. Consumers want access to their energy data too. Theme 5 for the State of the Consumer Report, consumers want clean energy. When we study what consumers want from their utility, clean energy comes up top with saving money and being in control. It's not all about saving money. In fact, I was at a financial seminar. Before I tell you that story, let me just show you what this part of the study means. So if you look on the far left of the slide, you'll see that when we ask consumers, is it important for utilities to have renewable energy on the grid, the numbers that say it's not important is so low, it's almost immeasurable. And then the red bar represents millennials, and the blue bar represents all the other generations. And so the next question we ask them is it important, but at no additional cost? And you'll see by far other generations say it's important, but we're not paying anything for it. Millennials are a little bit there. But the circled bars indicate how much higher millennial interest is than the non-millennial generation. It's important, but I can't pay for it right now. Or it's important, and I'm willing to pay an additional $3 to $4 a month for it. Meaning that this is very important to millennials, and they're even willing to pay for it. Now, they shouldn't have to, because clean energy is coming in at grid parity now. Most of you in the wholesale power market know that it is competing successfully against baseload generation, against generations we all thought would always be the cheapest, like coal and nuclear. Coal and nuclear can't compete anymore, at least in the US, and I'm pretty sure in the world, with cheaper, cleaner energy sources. So here are some headlines that I snagged just last week while I was preparing for this. The first one, DPL, Dayton Power and Light, the largest utility in Ohio, has officially shut down their longest running coal plants in that state that can't compete. Next, the owner of the nation's largest nuclear station has filed a $1.4 billion closing plan. Nuclear can't compete. And then finally, President Trump orders immediate steps to boost coal and nuclear so they stop shutting down. And we all know what immediate steps means. Immediate steps mean subsidies, because they can't compete. Energy efficiency, demand response, battery power is not here yet, but it's coming. Hot water heater storage, EV storage, all of these things, not even counting solar and wind. And I could have put 10 times the headlines for solar and wind, competing with long-term power purchase agreements with coal and nuclear and winning or at grid parity all over the world without subsidies. And so I'll tell you my story now. I was at a financial seminar, you know, those kind where you sit down to dinner at night and a financial services broker does a presentation, they treat you to a nice meal, and they hope you'll become a client. And I was at one of those in February, and a gentleman at my table said, I don't understand why utilities are putting all this clean energy on the grid. It doesn't make any sense to me. Solar power takes up all this land. We need land, and nobody wants it. And so I said, excuse me, sir, consumers do want it. In fact, when Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Clean Power Plan, which, by the way, he can't actually do until after his first administration ends. So if he gets reelected, he can't effectively do it. But if he doesn't, the next administration can cancel that plan. But anyway, as an aside, when Trump pulled out of the Clean Power Plan and the Paris Climate Accords, the states and cities of the United States all stepped forward with new pledges exceeding what the Paris Climate Accord pledged to do. So consumers want it, and that pressure is bubbling up from the ground up as well as from state leadership. And so that is the point I want to make, is that consumers really want clean energy on the grid, and they want the utility to do it. Now, a lot of utilities are offering consumers clean energy plans. How many of you have a utility where it offers you a clean energy plan that you can buy and pay a little more for per month? Show of hands? Okay, tiny, less than 10%. Or how many of you don't know if your utility offers one? Show of hands, because you've never looked. Okay, about another 10%. So not much. So this is a huge area of engagement for you if you're a retailer or if you're a wholesaler, to help your retail clients address this desire by consumers. Now, let me just close with this. Consumers are on a journey, and utilities need to go with consumers on that journey and take them there and build that relationship as consumers go in search of technology and clean energy and the other values that meet their needs. First, you want to provide them with basic education, and then offer new channels of engagement as consumers have learned where they are with basic education, with the bill, with data, with bill basics. And consumers want proactive outreach. They want you to be outreaching to them. They're not going to necessarily go to your website unless they hear from you. So offer them Twitter, Facebook, online marketplaces, some of the bill basics you've seen, outage management. Consumers want to be in control. They want to control their energy usage, they want to control their bill, and most importantly, they want clean energy on the grid. And so let me leave you with this. Do consumers want hot showers and cold beer? Absolutely. And some, that's all they want. But the majority want more than that from their utility. The majority have different values and attitudes. They fall into different categories. You don't always know what they are unless you talk to your consumers and find out and meet their needs and meet them where they are. So with that, I'd like to have you ask any questions that you have, including how can I get the research and how can I be a member? And if there's time, I'd love to take questions from the audience now. Is there time, Rob? A few minutes? Okay, thank you. But let's have some questions. Thank you. How do you get the research? Well, one way is to become a member. But if you're with a wholesaler and you're with IESO in particular, just give me your card and then let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll get you a copy. Yes, sir.
One of the problems we're having here in Ontario is that our retail market and our wholesale market aren't integrated.
Mm-hmm.
Our retail market is charging far too much for clean power, clean energy, and far too little for the installed capacity. And the result is they're not taking the off-peak power
Yes.
because it's too expensive. And so we're dumping it. Last year, I think we dumped over 10 terawatt hours.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I read about that. There's a really interesting article that I read about preparing for this, about how Ontario has time of use pricing, but the differences between the step-ups are too small to be effective. They're not sending accurate price signals to consumers. And so I can't solve your problems, but all I can say is that consumers need at least a 3.5 or 4.5 step-up in change between peak and off-peak, and what I understand you've got is 1 or 1.5, maybe 2, but it's too low. Consumers need a really serious, significant price signal between time of use brackets to send a meaningful price signal for them to shift energy or use off-peak power. And I think, I don't know what the challenges are to making that change, but that is a key change that needs to be made. And we have similar problems in the U.S. Hardly anybody's on a time of use plan, so we waste tons of clean energy off-peak. And I'm hoping personally that California's change will drive the rest of the country if it's successful. And we know global warming is here. We're seeing huge temperature spikes in the summer in the south, and So that's driving a lot more peak demand, which is very expensive. And then that gets put into the bucket of pricing, and all of us are on flat rate pricing in the US, and it's a bit of a disaster. It needs to be changed. Definitely. Hope that helps. Other questions? Yes.
One of the comments or questions you asked was about the role of the utilities in Ontario. Largely in Ontario, our utilities are the customer interface, but they're not really offering a lot of the customer solutions. So I was going to ask, are there markets where you've seen examples where utilities are partnering with the third-party service providers that are creating that kind of alignment of interests and then kind of significant uptake by consumers in programs and opportunities?
Yes, thank you for that question. I see both. I see some partnering with third providers. For example, that Bidgely video, I think Bidgely and Google Home are partnering and offering amazing consumer programs in partnership with utilities. Tendril is offering, as a third party, offering really great services in partnership with utilities. We've documented at least 18 case studies of third parties partnering with utilities. When I say document, I mean we have the details, the numbers, how many consumers sign up, how much money is saved, what pricing is offered, what are some marketing messages. PayGo is another one. PayGo is offering a great prepaid plan to help low-income consumers avoid having to pay a big deposit, help them get reconnected if they've been disconnected, and help them avoid all the fees that comes with reconnection and disconnecting when you're post-pay. I'd be glad to send you a bunch of those studies. Also, some utilities are using their own internal team to create some of those programs. So, for instance, Pepco out of DC, Maryland area, they've got a program called 2 Ways to Save. It's a summer peaking program, and that has above a 50% enrollment rate, a really high number for a peak shifting program. I'd be glad to give you some details about that one if you see me afterwards. My clock says 0. Do I have more time or one more? Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Just a question about kind of the two different consumer groups, because your organization is based out of the States mostly. And Canadians mostly buy their electricity from their government. Do you see any dichotomy? And time of use pricing was highly controversial in Ontario and doesn't exist really anywhere else across the country. Do you see anything different in between maybe contrasting the Canadian and the American market from consumer needs? Because I agree with you, there is changes, but do you kind of see, can you maybe speak to the differences culturally?
I see a lot of similarities. You're saying time of use is controversial here?
Yeah.
Is that what you just said? Yeah. I'm sure it's going to be controversial in the U.S. when California rolls it out. But I think a lot of that has to do with marketing appropriately to consumers, to helping them understand the peak pricing differential versus flat rate pricing. And consumers everywhere are used to different time of day pricing, like movies and airplanes use time-based pricing on their flights, with the most popular flights being at 4 and 5 p.m., and then the early and late ones are cheaper. Consumers are used to all that. And so utilities could do a better job with communicating those needs and changes to consumers about why time of use means you'll get a cheaper bill, because that peak demand is not getting folded into a more expensive flat rate pool. I haven't seen a lot of the messaging SMUD has come up with yet. I'm hoping they'll be very creative on that, as they were on how to manage your bill. And so I think what could alleviate some of the controversy here would be more marketing around how peak demand is expensive, peak load is expensive, and why time of use actually reduces the price. But as I said for the earlier gentleman's question, that those time of use blocks need to be a larger difference in cost. And then just communicate to consumers. If you can segment them and know which ones care about clean energy, then you can talk about how dirty peaker plants are and how expensive and wasteful they are, so we don't want to run them much. If you want to target your savings seekers, your price-sensitive customers, then you talk about how expensive peak demand is. If you want to talk to your energy innovative customers, your early adopters, then you talk about cool technology that peak shifting has. They can download on their app, they can pre-cool, they can do all these cool things using Google Home and Nest and the voice-assisted systems that they want. And if you don't know which of your customers are which, then you can have weaved messages where 2 of those are weaved together or 3 of those are weaved together so that no matter what they care about, their attention is caught. And so that's what I would recommend with that issue. I think I'm out of time. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Patty, so much for that and for really just illuminating some of the research that you've done and just sharing that with us. Just a couple administrative notes really quick. First of all, thank you for using the stationary mics. Let's keep going with that to make sure everyone can hear your questions. Second, if you're standing at the back or sitting at the side even, there's lots of room here with me at the front. So please make your way up and join us down in front. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce David McNeil from MCE to come and share with us a little bit about California's first community choice aggregator. David comes to us obviously from California, but he comes by way of doing studies at Queen's University, so perhaps this is a bit of a homecoming for him. David, I also noticed that you raised your hand to one of Patty's questions, so looking forward to hearing more about your company. So please join me in welcoming David.
Good morning. I'm David McNeil with Marin Clean Energy. It is an honor and a privilege to have been invited by the IESO to present before this audience. Marin Clean Energy, or MCE, is a municipal government agency and load-serving entity offering a variety of energy programs and services to approximately 1.5 million residents and businesses in the northern San Francisco Bay Area. MCE provides electricity to 470,000 accounts, has an annual load of 5,500 gigawatt hours, and a peak load of 1,100 megawatts. We provide an array of industry-leading energy and demand-side management acronyms, including NEM, FIT, EV, and EVSC rebates, TOU rates, and other programs and services with which I'm sure this audience is familiar. MCE began operations as California's first community choice aggregation in 2010 with 26,000 accounts. By 2016, there were 3 CCAs across the state serving a couple 100,000 accounts. And by the end of this year, there will be 22 CCAs serving 4.8 million accounts. And CCAs are expected to serve approximately 70% of California's load by 2022. California has a population of 40 million people and recently surpassed the United Kingdom as the 4th largest economy in the world. It is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and is a global leader in technology and innovation. So what accounts for this meteoric rise in CCAs in California? My purpose today is to describe the CCA business model, situate it within the California energy market, and demonstrate how CCAs are driving innovation and enhancing customer choice. CCA legislation exists in several jurisdictions across the United States, including New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Ohio. But it is in California that the model has developed the furthest, and it is on California that I will focus my remarks. There are 3 key pillars to the CCA business model. The first is a focus on providing electric generation and local programs. Historically, 80% of California has been served by 3 investor-owned utilities: Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Southern California Edison. Under the CCA model, the IOUs continue to provide transmission, distribution, and billing services as regulated monopolies. And CCA customers continue to receive one electricity bill from the utility. If they're CCA customers, the generation portion of their invoice will reflect CCA generation charges. I note that in California, the independent systems operator is responsible for balancing load and generation on an hourly basis and operates day-ahead and real-time markets. Capacity, or resource adequacy, is a regulatory requirement in California, with which CCAs comply using contracts with generators. As load-serving entities, CCAs hedge their loads with bilateral contracts for energy supply on an hourly basis, 365 days a year. We also engage in integrated resource planning, and our 10-year IRPs are available on our websites. CCAs do not own generating assets, but there is no, and instead procure energy through short, medium, and long-term contracts with terms up to 25 years. There's no prohibition against owning generating assets, but as you know in the United States, the federal government has decided to incentivize renewable energy through tax credits. And as a not-for-profit municipal agency, we can't take advantage of those tax credits. And therefore, we work with developers who can and pass on those savings to us and our customers through lower PPA rates. In 2018, MCE undertook separate RFPs for grid-scale renewable projects, local renewable projects, and undertook its first RFP for storage, whose results we are still evaluating. The second pillar of the CCA model is local control. CCAs are created through enabling legislation. In California, the legislation allows municipalities to create a CCA through formation documents similar to bylaws. The governance structures take two forms. As in San Francisco and San Jose, the CCAs operate as segregated agencies controlled by a single municipality. And practically speaking, they function as departments of the city. More commonly, CCAs are jointly controlled by multiple municipalities, and like MCE, are functionally independent, standalone entities. In MCE's case, we have 33 municipal governments, cities, towns, counties, who are members of the agency, and our board is composed of 28 elected officials. Local control allows communities, through their elected officials, to set the mission, vision, and programmatic priorities for each CCA in accordance with local needs. In MCE's case, the board has made renewable energy, energy efficiency, and GHG reductions a priority. Our generation mix is 62% renewable, nearly double the state's renewable portfolio standard requirements, and double that of our competitor, PG&E. And MCE has entered into long-term renewable energy contracts for solar, wind, and geothermal resources totaling $1.8 billion. Our integrated resource plan calls for us to be 100% GHG-free by 2025, and we currently administer downstream energy efficiency programs with an annual budget of $10 million. Other jurisdictions place greater emphasis on other priorities. The CCA in Lancaster County has focused on local economic development and used its CCA to attract the Chinese bus manufacturer BYD to its service territory. Other CCAs place greater emphasis on reducing or minimizing electricity rates. CCAs control retail rate setting and rate design for generation services, and rates are set annually by CCA boards without third-party oversight. Beyond broad policy objectives, rates, and IRPs, local control plays an important role in the choice and design of local programs, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The third pillar of the CCA model is a competitive market. As noted earlier, 80% of California is served by investor-owned utilities. The rest of California is served by integrated municipal utilities, most notably Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and Sacramento Municipal Utility District. As part of the deregulation in the late 1990s, the state allowed certain large accounts to contract directly with merchant generators in what is known as the Direct Access Program. But in the wake of the electricity crisis in the early 2000s, the Direct Access Program was capped and remains capped at about 10% of California's load. Prior to the advent of CCA, customers in the IOU's territory received service, which is to say 80% of Californians received service from private, for-profit, government-regulated monopolies, or in a few cases, from direct access providers. As the name implies, CCAs introduced customer choice. CCAs operate as opt-out programs within defined and non-overlapping territories. Under the CCA legislation, when a municipality joins a CCA, all of the customers in the municipality automatically become customers of the CCA for electric generation, provided that they have the option at any time to opt out and go back to receive generation services from the IOU. Under legislation, when service is initiated, CCAs must notify customers through 2 written notices before initiating service and with 2 written notices after service begins. And most customers who opt out do so around the time of this enrollment period. In short, CCAs have introduced competition and retail choice to a formerly monopolistic market. CCAs do not receive tax or other revenue from their municipal members and cannot, under California state law, make distributions to their members. CCAs are financially independent and rely exclusively on retail electricity sales to ensure its financial strength. We are not-for-profit and mission-driven organizations, but in all other respects, we function as competitive businesses. The absence of government support, coupled with our participation in a competitive market, fundamentally makes CCAs better at what we do. MCE has consistently offered a higher renewable content than PG&E while offering lower cost services to its customers. At the same time, ensuring its financial strength is essential. MCE has accumulated significant reserves, and Moody's recently awarded MCE an investment-grade credit rating, the first credit rating for a CCA. Failure to offer competitive rates, superior products, or allowing for financial mismanagement would no doubt lead to the demise of the agency, and the organization is thus properly incentivized to manage its affairs prudently and offer exceptional services to our customers over the long term. So, in summary, the 3 keys of the CCA model are: focus upon providing electric generation and customer programs, local control of rate setting, policy, and program design through a municipally controlled public agency, and competition with the incumbent utility. How has this business model spurred innovation and local choice? The key here is that local control has moved the industry from centralized to decentralized decision-making and spurred a plethora of programmatic variations in response to local needs. Let me give you a few examples. A number of new communities recently joined MCE in April of this year. One resident got a notice in his mailbox from MCE and called our call center to opt out of the program. And he said, "I'm going to opt out my business too." Well, that business represented 10% of our load. Needless to say, we were highly motivated to retain this customer, and the entire MCE management team met with the customer in an effort to retain his business. The customer has a flexible load, and what emerged was a plan to design a rate schedule that would pass through hourly wholesale prices plus a fixed markup. The customer would save $30,000 a month and regulate their load to better accord with the needs of the grid. Being flexible and innovative, MCE was able to retain this customer. Another example can be found in the area of environmental justice. MCE serves some of the wealthiest communities in California and some of the most disadvantaged. Often, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities suffer from the worst air quality and are at higher risk of the adverse consequences of climate change. To address some of these issues, MCE's board made it a priority to offer solar rebates to low-income communities and partnered with a local nonprofit, Grid Alternatives, to deliver this program. MCE also offers a robust multifamily energy efficiency program for similar reasons. Across the bay in Oakland, the CCA there is working to replace a 165 megawatt peaker gas plant located near the downtown with a combination of batteries, demand response, and energy efficiency. The plant only operates a handful of hours a year, and local environmental activists have been calling for its closure for some time. Looking forward, California has enormous challenges related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, integrating large quantities of renewable resources onto the grid, maintaining affordable prices for customers, and continuing to drive conservation and other demand-side management programs in an industry that is rapidly evolving. We believe that CCAs are uniquely well-suited to meet those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I should have mentioned earlier that that with the spotlights that we have today, we're thankful that that David will not only do the spotlight for us, but then will also join our next panel. So with that, I would like to invite our panelists to maybe take their time ambling up here. But while we do that, and as we transition to this panel, I'd like to introduce Colin Anderson, who is the moderator of this panel, and many of you will know Colin, who's a strong advocate for the industrial customers in the electricity sector, and he brings a wealth of experience not only from this perspective but from many different perspectives in Ontario. So we're thankful to have him moderate this panel, and he's also certainly a mainstay at our IESO engagement meetings that we have. So with that, I'd like to invite the panel to come on up.
Good morning, and thanks, Rob, for the kind introduction. I appreciate that. I do want to thank the IESO for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. Certainly an honor to be here at the summit, and particularly with such distinguished colleagues, so thank you for that. Before I get started, I do just want to ensure that everybody is aware of the AMCO organization, what it is exactly that we do. AMCO represents the interests of large electricity-intensive industries, and that includes steel manufacturers, pulp and paper, mining operations, petrochemical facilities, automotive plants, and many others. Our members use more than 15 terawatt hours of electricity every year, so we do have a real stake in the electricity system, in the market, and in the costs associated with that electricity. AMCO is the voice of the industrial power users in the province, and we advocate for a reliable, affordable system. And that's the general perspective that we bring to most conversations that we have, including those that deal with the subject of innovation. Because for us, innovation has to be able, quite frankly, to create value. My members have innovated for decades in their own specific industrial sectors, and they've used this value creation criterion, and so we expect the same to be used in the electricity sector with respect to assessment of innovation and what it's going to do for industrial customers from that perspective. So as you'll see from the agenda, there's a significant and appropriate, quite frankly, focus on the consumer at this year's summit, and this panel will absolutely contribute to that. So as I said before, I'm very fortunate to share the stage with some very accomplished folks, and I'd like to introduce them to you at this point. Starting to my immediate left, and you've already had some introduction to David McNeil. David is the Manager of Finance at Marin Clean Energy. David's responsibilities include budgeting, treasury, banking, risk management, accounting, and financial reporting and relationships with key stakeholders such as banks, rating agencies, and institutional investors in energy projects. David's also responsible for advising the board of directors on finance-related matters. David brings over 20 years of experience in financial and risk management activities, including roles in credit underwriting, strategic planning, mergers and acquisitions, and project management. Prior to joining MCE, David served as president of EEF Advisors, which consulted to departments of energy, electric utilities, and regulators throughout North America. David studied at Queen's University in Kingston and holds a CFA designation. To David's left is Chris Carradine, Executive Vice President of Business Development at Ecobee. Chris is responsible for strategic partnerships for utility, commercial, and OEM customers. Ecobee was the first company to launch a Wi-Fi connected thermostat, and today is on a mission to create smarter products that are beautifully designed, easy to use, provide comfort and savings for families, and are good for the planet. Chris has a long track record of driving strategic change to help organizations deliver on financial, social, and environmental performance targets. Prior to Ecobee, Chris was Chief Operating Officer at Jancy Research Incorporated, a top-ranked investment research firm specializing in the performance of global securities with a social mandate. Chris also spent time at a not-for-profit where he helped secure $50 million in funding to develop what is now recognized as a leading international center for the development of cities. To Chris's left, we have Julie Gervin, independent consultant and consumer advocate. Julie is an independent consultant specializing in natural gas and electricity regulation and in regulatory policy. Julie is a member of the IESO Stakeholder Advisory Committee and represents the consumer sector. She's also currently advising the Consumers' Council of Canada in its role of representing the interests of residential consumers in both electricity and natural gas matters in Ontario. And she's been involved extensively with the restructuring initiatives in Ontario's natural gas and electricity sectors. Julie was a member of the Electricity Industries Market Design Committee and was the residential representative on the IESO's technical panel for 2 terms. She spends a large part of her time managing interventions in regulatory proceedings before the Ontario Energy Board. Julie has a BA from McMaster University and an MA in Public Administration from Carleton. And finally, we have Uliana Kalin, Head of the Energy Partnerships for Google in Canada. Uliana is an entrepreneurial leader, passionate about how industries adopt technology and innovation. She has 20 years of experience in the connected home, smart grid, and global marketing and technology sectors. In her current role, Uliana works with partners to develop customer-focused energy programs that leverage Google hardware and Nest products. In 2010, Uliana co-founded the National Industry Association, Smart Grid Canada, where she oversees international partnerships. She negotiated R&D projects between leading global utilities and Canadian universities. She was designated the Government of Canada's champion speaker on Smart Grid Europe 2016 and Canada's National Smart Grid Expert at the OECD 2014. Uliana holds an MS in Communications from Ithaca College and Cornell University. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. So just in terms of the format for this discussion, I want to give you a general flavor of how this is going to play out. Each of the panel members will have the opportunity to deliver brief opening remarks, except for David. He's already had his few minutes and he said he would pass on it again, so we'll pass on David having opening remarks this time. At that point, I'll kick some things off with just some general questions that I have, but certainly, hopefully, we can transition that to questions from the floor, and there are microphones that you can use. Old school, you can pass me a note if you want. I'm sorry, I'm not using Slido. I don't know how to use it. So we use those two forums, and hopefully we can transition to people from the floor asking questions. So let's get started again, and immediately on my left, why don't we start with David? Sorry, we're skipping David. Never mind. We'll go to Chris for opening comments. Over to you, Chris.
You were so good the first time around. Sure we want to skip you for the second time? Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Carradine. I'm with Ecobee. We are a proud Homer company based here in Toronto, Canada. We started and created the first Wi-Fi-enabled smart thermostat. I've been with the company 10 and a half years. The company is 11 years old. I was employee number 4. Today we have 400 people in the city of Toronto that work on Ecobee, and it is an incredibly exciting success story for our city and for our province. We're going to talk about innovation today, and you'll probably hear me repeat a phrase a couple of times. We believe innovation is another word for beautifully curated customer experiences. And that's what we wake up every single day thinking about. How do we deliver those experiences to our customers? And certainly tie that back into why that's important for energy as well too. So for those that are not from Toronto, welcome to the greatest city in all of North America. Again, look forward to talking further on this panel about this exciting subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Colin. I think I want one of those home energy voice assistants. I was impressed by that video. I guess just a few opening statements about innovation, and we hear the words all the time, and it sounds great, but I think the question is, what does it really mean for consumers? I think we have to look at the end of the day, how can we ensure customers get value for money? And I think the other thing we need to look at is how do we ensure that customers, ratepayers, aren't left with stranded assets? Another concern, certainly from my perspective, is how can we protect consumer data? And finally, I think it's appropriate to look at the balance between utility ratepayers and utility shareholders. And I think that's something that we can't ever sort of, we have to keep thinking about that. So those are just my opening remarks.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to IESO for inviting me and being part of the panel. It is a pleasure to be here and really talk about where the industry is going in this really crucial time and having all the parties at the table. I currently lead energy partnerships for Nest Labs that join actually Google officially in February for Google in Canada. I have a mixed background of marketing and technology. I've actually started my career in post-communist Romania, where I'm from, when advertising just started. And I've sort of joined the dot-com revolution and the Web 2.0 and the smart grid. And here we are now in this sort of a post-complex, digitally driven world. Because of where I sit and where I'm coming from, innovation obviously is very important for Google, and innovation has been at the core of Google's existence, as well as at Nest existence. I think I fully agree with Julie that innovation only exists if it brings value to users and to the end users. And that's been always the core value and principle of Google. And we really, as we grow as a company, we strive to keep that very much a key value that we think and breathe every day as employees. The other interesting piece of information that I want to bring is innovation is actually helpful for an entire ecosystem. We do firmly believe that the companies, the industries, the organizations that are going to be successful in the future are the ones who are platform-driven. They're the ones who actually could provide value and unlock value for a wide range of stakeholders playing in the ecosystem. And I think it's quite interesting and very timely that IESO is in this position nowadays to really be a key organization that is being developed and grown, and also take it to the next level of becoming a true enabler for the next phase of our industry. So we're really happy to be here and provide all of that.
Okay, thank you for those opening comments. As I said off the top, I'll kick things off with a few questions, and then when people from the floor get comfortable or have had a coffee, they can get up to the microphones and transition over to you folks asking the questions. So just from my perspective for the panel, the theme of this year's summit is unlocking the value of innovation. So maybe, and in no particular order, you can briefly explain how your view and your organization's view of innovation is creating that value for consumers.
Sure. I'll kick it off. So it's interesting. On this panel, you have Juliana and myself representing Ecobee and Nest. And we probably collectively have, with all due respect to Honeywell, 92 to 95% of the market share of smart thermostats across North America. There's millions, if not tens of millions, of our products installed in consumers' homes. And so just at a very high level, innovation is really the backbone, I would say, to our two companies. From the standpoint of, at least our CEO looked at his dumb thermostat and said there's got to be a better way. And so hence the creation of a Wi-Fi enabled smart thermostat. I mean, that is innovation right there, because by putting our products on a wall of a customer that has an old thermostat, they're immediately going to save energy. And then for our utility or LDC partners in the room, you now have a two-way communicating device, which means that you can actually connect with consumers. And no doubt we'll spend a lot of time thinking about that. But innovation has also led both of our organizations to take a look at the home and what else can we do to create beautiful, curated customer experiences in the home. So for us, we just launched a voice-enabled light switch. And quite frankly, about 4.5 years ago, we bet the company. We made a bet the company kind of move on voice. So I'll slow down in one sec, but I've got Patty asked some questions of the crowd, and I think you'll probably hear quite a bit about voice from at least the two smart thermostat manufacturers in the room. But I'm going to ask a question of everybody here. How many people have what I'll call a speaker in their home, either an Amazon Alexa device, a Google Home device? If you can raise your hands, I'd really be interested to see. Okay, so to give you a perspective on innovation and where we're going, if we were sitting in any city in the U.S., those numbers would be entirely different. It would be around 70 to 80% of people would have raised their hands. And so we see voice as the next huge innovation within the smart home. We think it's going to disintermediate customers from this device. And you saw that interesting Bisley video. So I'll pause there, but no doubt there'll be more discussions.
Great. California is famous for doing everything and its opposite all at once. And it's hard sometimes to distinguish innovation and dealing with the volume and the speed of change and just doing your job on a day-to-day basis. The major challenges, two kind of major challenges that I would highlight for California. There is an enormous amount of the generation mix in the state is changing rapidly, and there's a large quantity of variable generating resources, wind and solar primarily, coming onto the grid. And that's creating a great deal of price volatility. And so for us, moving load from the evening hours into the day when solar is available is a key priority, and that means motivating consumers to change. There's two ways where there's a few, well, it's actually really an all hands on deck type problem. Time of use rates is one way to address that. we're also working with a variety of demand response programs. The second major challenge for California, and challenge in a good way, I mean it's a remarkable opportunity, is with respect to electric vehicles. And in our service territory, which I mentioned is in some areas quite affluent, 10% of new car sales are BEVs, so battery electric vehicles, which is some of the highest rates in North America. California, as you probably know, is a fairly temperate climate, and as you also may know, Californians drive like maniacs. So when you combine those two things, what that means is the electrification of transportation in California is going to have a really dramatic impact on the demand for electricity. And I calculate in our service territory that if we were to electrify all small and light and medium duty vehicles, that we would double the load of MCE. So that in and of itself is an enormous challenge. And what we're trying to do is incentivize daytime use of electric vehicles through charging of electric vehicles through the build-out of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, primarily at businesses and other locations where consumers will charge during the day.
I guess at this point in time, and let's say April of last year, we weren't talking about as much about this as we're talking now at Google. We are looking at stepping into the age of assistance, with voice being the center of it. So we fully agree, obviously, we are on the manufacturer side, fully agree with Chris that the next revolution is voice. We've gone through PC, we went to web, we went to mobile, and now artificial intelligence and voice. It's what is really going to take the industry to the next level and engage consumers deeper and provide more value. The innovation from our standpoint really is basically creating hardware that have AI, software, and better design together combined to really provide a radically helpful experience for users. The reason for which actually Nest Labs has really officially joined the Google company is that we could work closely with Google Assistant, which is the software that powers the Google Home, so we could actually innovate our products. And when I talk about age of assistance, I think it's important to take a step back and really, what does it really mean, the age of assistance? We believe that we live in a super complex, digitally driven world. In this digitally driven world, the consumers are hyper-connected and they're actually hyper-empowered. Doesn't mean that they're out of touch. It's just you, as a company, as a utility, as an LDC, as any organization, need to find the right moment in time to engage with them and to assist them. And what that assistant means, you need to find, maybe they want to find information, they want to do something, they want to learn. So we sort of look at a combination of these transformation as voice being another very important channel of engaging customers. And it's not, I fully agree with Chris, we see the tendency of moving away from using the smartphone, moving away from actually being engaged into a screen to step away and use voice and maybe use tapping, use clicking, a combination of different actions to engage. And at this point in time, from Google hardware or Nest end, we talk to utilities, we talk to LDCs, we talk about voice integration, how those devices can help with customers with energy efficiency, can help with energy bill payment. We look at outage alerts that could be done through a communication that could be actually facilitated through the Google Home. So those are sort of a new conversations that are just happening, and really I'd say over the past few months.
Thanks, Colin. I'm probably the least exciting person on this panel because I'm sort of almost the...
Not at all. I add that you are the most important because you represent the consumers.
But a bit of a skunk at a garden party in a sense. Just in the sense that you know, I think innovation really means giving customer choice and the ability in the energy sector to be more proactive about our energy use. But I also have to be the cautionary one to say that from a customer perspective, we need to move at a pace that fits the customer needs, and not to go too fast and not to sort of jump off a cliff without ensuring that we have all the all the things in place that protect consumers, protect their data, and ensure that these things are cost effective. So I look at an example in Ontario, which is smart meters, and the tale there is we did really jump off a cliff. And you have to think now, what has been the true value of smart meters? I think going forward, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's something that we thought was a great idea from an innovative perspective, but from a policy perspective really wasn't implemented in a way that brought a lot of value to customers. So.
Okay, thanks for that. A lot of things there that I'd kind of like to pursue. I think I'm going to go with the last first. Skunk at a garden party. I can't beat that. I'd love to try, but I can't. Maybe for Julie and others, if you're interested, some of the things that you talked about specifically made me think a little bit about the role of government and the role of the regulator in supporting innovation and bringing it closer to the customer. Do you have any thoughts on what that should be, what it should look like? And maybe if there's some certain limits that should be placed on that.
Yeah, I really think that we do see a role for government, and I think what we need to do is some coordination. For example, right now in Ontario, we've got a lot going on with cap and trade, with CDM, with conservation and the gas industry. And what I see there is a real lack of coordination. For example, if you want to get an energy audit for your home, one of the primary programs, where do you go? Do you go to your electric utility? Do you go to the new government programs? Do you go to your gas utility? So that's an example of where I think we need coordination. And I also am a big supporter of, if we're going to explore new technologies, we should probably be doing that through government funding, not necessarily through utility. That's a suggestion I would make. So, yeah, I just think that there does need to be a lot more coordination than we have right now.
So that question scares me a bit, to be quite transparent and blunt, because if I don't move, I die. It's that simple. And so where there's government or where there's regulators, excuse me, that to me scares me a bit just because of pace of change. And so I'm all for that type of partnership, but realize the pace of change that companies like Ecobee are on. As an example, when we first wrote the business plan 10 and a half years ago, we estimated that it would take 24 months to land our first utility opportunity. We were off by 3 years. It took 5 years. And if you look at the pace of change with our technology, when we created our first thermostat, we waited probably 4 years to bring out another product. That product took about 18 months to create. Our last product, which was the Ecobee 4, which has voice embedded into it, took us 7 months. And so that's the product cycle and pace that we're on. So if something's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years, and we're going to have pilots, and we're going to have betas, and we're going to have discussions, we as a manufacturer will be way beyond what we're talking about at that point in time in 12 to 14 months. So again, pace of change is really important to understand.
So just on the pace of change part that you've raised, Chris, and I find that very interesting because certainly pace of change is something that I hear from my members as well. I hear it from them in a slightly different context. I hear it from them along the lines of what Julie had said. We've had programs in the past where we have stampeded, for example, to get to a conclusion. Smart grid, green energy. Perhaps we overpaid on some of those programs, perhaps not, depending on your perspective. Is there something we can do with respect to innovation to ensure that we don't just innovate, but we innovate affordably and make sure that that pace of change takes that into consideration?
Define affordably.
Affordably, I guess if I was going to frame it in Patty's language, is I want to be able to take a hot shower and have a cold beer.
Yeah.
But then if I have to have that first, and then I'll think about my innovation. But if I can't have my hot shower and cold beer first, maybe I'm not as interested.
So I'll jump on it really quickly. So data. So if we think about the home, there's really three constellations in the home. There's energy, there's security, and there's entertainment. We certainly play in energy and security. But again, back to the pace of change. What has become increasingly apparent is that these buzzwords that we hear so much, machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, they are changing the game because sensors in the home, for at least us residentially, are very inexpensive, but sensors deliver data. So what would take us 3 years ago, maybe 18 months to cycle on, machine learning and AI can do in a matter of weeks. That's the exponential change and pace that we're going under. So when you're talking about innovation, machine learning is all about algorithms. AI, it's really just another name for beautifully curated customer experiences. Those things are shaping and changing the space that we play in dramatically and affordably.
I guess I can respond to this and the previous questions I will combine as I start to think about it. I agree with Julie that actually innovation that is brought to consumers, the government should play a role into it, should sort of because I think the government is a very unique role to really represent the public interest and the interest of everybody. Now, the reality of what Chris said is as a private company, especially if you are smaller versus larger, you have very clear timelines to actually create a product, come to market. In a large organization, you have to convince someone that your product makes sense and there's an opportunity. If it's not, that's going to be killed. In a small organization, you actually need to survive. So the pace of change that is dictated by the consumers and by the market, it's actually much faster because the users expect everything come faster. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. I think processes of stakeholder engagement and the government being cognizant of the need of change on the private sector, these two should come together and find a way. And that's probably an answer to the previous question. What was sorry, I'm going back to the affordability. It's interesting. So the example of Nest, we came up with a Nest Learning thermostat in 2011, and then we created, it took us, we waited for a few years before we actually came up with another version, which was Nest E. That's an affordable version of the Nest Learning thermostat, and it just launched in September last year. Now, we looked at the current product that we have. How could you make that more available and affordable for segments of the population that can afford a high-priced product? So we launched an initiative. It's called the Power Project, and we actually talked to our CEO, said there are people out there in North America that have a hard time paying their energy bill. And what can we do as a technology company to help them and provide our product out there and do it in a way that helps everybody? So we looked at innovating with our existing product, innovating at the level of program and design and program authoring and product and market. So we came up with a goal of 1 million thermostats, Nest E thermostats, for free for the low income and moderate programs. They're not actually for free, they're almost at cost from our perspective, but we're trying to play our role into providing this technology. So it's just an example of affordable innovation, not necessarily as the product, because it's expensive to create a first product, but over time, how could you bring that to other segments? And I'm sure it's not just Nest.
Colin, I was going to say, I was interested in that first video with the gentleman who was on the voice assistant, and what I was curious about, and maybe some of the panel members can help me, is, for example, you obviously have to have within the context of that utility very sophisticated, IT system to be able to provide all of that. And I just wondered, in terms of who pays for that? So is it a utility cost? Is it really expensive? Is it not really expensive? There's some users that are going to get value of it. Some people don't care. And so, sort of going back to the affordability thing, I think you have to always step back to say what brings value to the customers and sort of and who should pay. And I don't know. I'm not familiar with that technology, but is that something that's really expensive to implement?
I guess for instance, I can answer with one point of view. So the cost to the call center for a utility, it's, let's say, anywhere between $15 to $40, depending on the length of time. And now the cost of the assistive technology, for instance, the Google Home, I'm talking about the mini Google Home, and a variety of other ones that are going to come to the market now that, it's actually decreasing. And it's decreasing to a point in the States, it's almost at parity. In Canada, unfortunately, we pay a bit more for our products. That we all know that. In Canada, it's a little bit more. But when you compare, as not all the customers are going to, let's say, use a Google Home or type of technology to engage with their utilities, but some of them would. So then you could take some of those calls and interactions that go to the customer service and they're expensive, you could take them to and allow consumers to engage with them. And that's an example of balancing the affordability. Because the technology as an overall, the cost of deploying that technology is decreasing over time.
I would, just stepping back and looking at some of these previous questions from a higher level, in California, CCAs have a close working relationship with the California Public Utilities Commission. I would say that the CPUC has been challenged by the rate of change and by the complexity of the changes that are taking place in California energy markets. And CCAs, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier, are largely about moving from centralized to decentralized decision-making. And there's definitely some cons about that. For market participants operating in California, you're going to now have to engage with a whole range of different market actors and CCAs, as opposed to just one centralized agency. But the benefit of that is that we tend to move much more quickly, much more nimbly, and you've got now a broader range of actors who are willing to engage with your new technology and with innovation. So, and I would also add that we are highly motivated to work with private sector actors and technology innovators in order to deliver their services to our customers.
I'll give you two examples really quickly of innovation and what I'll call, I guess, affordability. We had a client, a utility client in the Northeast. They did 40,000 home audits, actually physically people walking streets, banging on doors, wrapping pipes, etc. If you take a look at the products that Google or Nest and Ecobee put out, you can totally, and of those 40,000, maybe 10% had an actual impact. So you can do the exact same thing with data. You can do virtual home energy audits based upon the data that we have. And you can look at all of those customers in your service footprint and you can say, hey, why don't I pick the 5% that are the worst offenders and go to them directly instead of banging on 40,000 doors. And then FPL, sort of Florida Power and Light, we've done a statewide program with them where they've used voice skills, not dissimilar to what you saw in the Bidgley video. Their ratings have either been 4.5 out of 5 stars, because customers love the energy skill, or there was 0.5. And it's not because that skill was bad, it was because the customers wanted to do more. And the biggest thing was pay their bills. And so, again, back to voice and what we define as the war for your coffee table or your side table. Over the next 6 to 9 months, you're going to see incredible deals on speakers, and if you buy this product, you're going to get something else, because there really is a race for that coffee table and side table. So 2 examples.
Yeah. If I can add, Chris mentioned the word skill, and that comes from the Amazon, and it's basically the voice interaction. We at Google talk about it as action, but they're the same way. It's basically how you interact with a smart speaker. One interesting, I'm just going to build upon Chris's example, is actually one of the ways customers engage with Google Home or Google Assistant is to have a recipe be narrated to them. They say, hey Google, can you tell me how do I make a cheesecake? And Google Home actually goes step by step how you make a cheesecake, which is sort of an interesting and a little different. I was not expecting that's not how I cook, But if you think about it from a narrative or rhythm, a voice perspective, a light home audit, it has the same steps as recipe making that it's told. So you could take that and transition it to voice very easily. Is that going to be a way of customers are going to engage in the beginning? No, there's a bit of an education period, but there is an opportunity to look at how do consumers use these smart speakers, and how could that be translated to the electricity usage and electricity consumption and engagement.
David, you mentioned at one point in your response something about centralized versus decentralized and the changes that we're seeing in that area. It certainly gave rise in my mind to a question. Some of the current discussions that I'm hearing on innovation involve a theme of, I guess, what I would call grid defection, and this is probably more on the wholesale side than on the retail side. But in general, becoming less reliant on the existing infrastructure by installing behind-the-meter technologies, for example. Do you guys have any comments on any potential problems that you see with this general approach? And I realize this is quite a wide-open question, but I want it to be wide open so that you can take it wherever you want. So any problems that you see with this general decentralization approach, and what we could do to mitigate those problems going forward?
Well, let me say what we don't consider to be a problem. We tend to hedge our load many years in advance, but we don't buy 100% of our of generation to match 100% of expected usage. So what that means is that losing load for us as a not-for-profit agency is not really a problem. And if customers want to install rooftop solar, continue with conservation efforts, and reduce their usage of energy from the grid, we're all for that. We're huge supporters of that. The question becomes, who's going to pay for what? And we start to encounter some equity issues, which I'm sure that you're familiar with in Ontario. In California, we're paying now sort of $20-25 a megawatt hour for grid-scale solar, and for NEMS customers, we're paying them the retail rate for their rooftop solar, which is, in our case, about $70 a megawatt hour. So you've got a $40-50 delta between the wholesale cost of solar that I pay for it on a grid scale and what I have to take it from NEMS customers for. And what that means is that all ratepayers need to pay for effectively pay for the solar that energy that I'm taking off of those rooftops. So that's a challenging issue, I think, for California and jurisdictions around North America, and one that we're continuing to work on.
Sure. So I'm not sure about grid defection. I'll give you, in a very short order, my vision of the smart home. So we believe that, yes, we can control heating and cooling. We're doing that today. We can control lighting. But what else is in that smart home? There's solar, there's storage, there's hot water, and there are EVs. And we think we're very well positioned to be able to support our customers and to help them manage those collectively. And so with that, I think we become a very, very strong partner to our utility friends or LDC friends, because there's a lot that we can do through that customer experience. But at the flip side, if that is not something that's palatable for our utility partners, then we can certainly bid that into energy markets as well too. And so we become a very interesting hedge tool for friends like David, as well as retail energy providers. But we also become a pretty interesting player within energy markets as well too. So I see that being a very, very interesting thing that will develop over the next months and years.
All I would just say is I think grid defection is a serious issue, and it's something that we all have to put our minds to, because we're going to be faced with stranded assets. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but it's definitely a high concern, certainly from the customer perspective.
The stranded assets is a large issue in California as well. Sorry, I just lost my point I'll come back to it.
Maybe if I start speaking, then you'll have a...
Sorry, why stranded? Why do you think it's going to... Maybe I shouldn't take on my fellow panelists. I apologize. But as more and more devices become smarter, and we have communication, we have the ability to you know, it's not a switch. It's not a dumb switch. That's one way. So do you think that lessens the concern around stranded assets?
No, I just think the reality is we're going to have stranded assets. We've got you know, assets that are there now that probably won't be necessary. And at some point we have to figure out how to pay for that.
So I don't think that the scenario of the grid defection, I think it's played to be more negative and big and ominous than actually will end up being. And that's my personal view. I do, from this standpoint, and I guess Google hardware to a certain extent, we see ourselves as partners to this transformation that the industry is going through. And it is at the system operator level, and it's at LDC level, and a variety of other DER integrators. I believe these are opportunities to work with us to connect the different devices in the home, to bring the smart home at the, not just to be sort of what the customers used to be at the end of the load, to be part of the planning and to help with grid management and variability in the system. I do see the role of central generation declining over time. Yes, that indeed, I do see it. It's not going to go away because we're still going to need it. Here in Ontario, we are not blessed with the hydro capacity of Quebec, Manitoba, or BC just by nature of geography. So we need to find a way to have that stable load. But over time, that's going to probably decrease as the DER and the distributed energy will come more and more into the grid. I think it's even more important to create a system, and I think it's even more important for IESO to become a player to really find a way to balance this system and allow all the parties to work together. But I think the technology companies do want to partner, and they don't want to run the grid. I believe that the scenario of, Uber, what kind of a Uber is going to come to the electricity industry and take over? It's interesting. It is good to look at from a forecasting scenario exercise. The reality is that Uber benefited from an infrastructure that everybody had access to, which were cars, and also look at a customer who was who could have been better served and a better experience. And the infrastructure that the electricity system and industry has, it's very complicated. Are we, all of us, going to become traders of energy at the end level? As the consumers? I don't think so. I think there's an opportunity for the system to change, but not to be completely wiped.
Well, I think grid defection is in some senses a misnomer. If you're talking about completely disconnecting from the grid and islanding yourself, well, that's one thing. But if you put solar on your rooftop, you're not becoming less dependent on the grid, you're becoming more dependent on the grid, because you're not just taking power from the grid, now you're also putting it on. And I think the other area where this arises is in the case of electric vehicles, where we're, I think, looking for electric vehicles to eventually be a source of power. Through battery discharge during peak periods. So I don't see. I think what we're looking for consumers of electricity is to become more engaged and to help us as generators and market participants to better manage the grid using more renewables.
Some really great comments there. I'm just going to respond to a couple of them quickly. I know I'm the moderator, but I could still speak. Just the idea of the reduction in reliance on centralized generation, the idea of stranded assets, certainly that's something that I and my members have been very concerned with for quite some time. And I guess in my simple-minded way, I have a kind of a metaphor that I use to describe it. We're all on a boat, and some people at some point decide instead of being on the boat, they'd rather just swim themselves. So just before they jump overboard, they hand their bucket of costs to the next guy. So the guy that's left on the boat at the end, he's got an awful lot of bags of cost. And that's the kind of centralized versus decentralized concern that I share with my members. And to the point of, I think it was Julie and David, and well, all of the panelists really, there has to be some sort of a consideration of that with respect to the pacing of the change and with respect to who is going to pay for what and how eventually it's going to be structured. So thank you for those comments. I guess there was one thing that occurred to me during Patty's keynote speech, and she addressed it very well in terms of the customer segmentation, but I wondered if the panelists had a view on, in considering innovation and unlocking customer value and increasing engagement, are we unconsciously thinking only about affluent customers? How does this get at, and how can maybe the lower income customers still take advantage of the innovation to the same extent as the gentleman in the film who was speaking to his voice-activated box and clearly was probably a relatively affluent customer? Is there a delta between the haves and the have-nots, and will this accentuate it?
So I think the gentleman that was in that video is in the room today. He may be signing autographs at the back sometime later. To Nest Google's credit, they have done a phenomenal job in advertising their energy poverty and bringing products to market at a cost that is significantly reduced for low to medium income or income qualified, and Ecobee is doing the same thing as well. So I'd say that from that standpoint, we are certainly looking at that income qualified group very, very closely. But I would say that if you look at our customers, so maybe to piggyback on what Patty was saying, so we divide our customers into personas. And so Tech Josh was the first customer that we had, loves technology, early adopter. We have house proud Amanda now, which you could call the early majority. She's married, kids, home is her castle. What goes into that home is very, very important to her. And then we have value Greg. And so Greg can certainly afford the bells and whistles and the new technology, but he is very critical or looks at it sort of with a critical eye and is looking for value. So both Nest and Ecobee, as a smart thermostat manufacturer, have products in the market at $169. So when you take that, and that's U.S. pricing, sorry, but you take that and you take a look at what's happening with rebates across the energy industry, you're getting to a scenario whereby the products that we manufacture are available for, in some cases, $19 when you add in a Black Friday or a rebate or. And so actually they're very, very affordable to a lot of us throughout North America.
All I would say is that to the extent that you want to enhance the accessibility of these technologies to lower income customers, I think that's more of a government role rather than funding that through utility rates. That's what I would say.
Okay. And to sort of about Chris's and Nico's and Julie's point, we work closely with the government and utilities for programs that target the low and moderate income segments. We'd like the technology to be available to everybody. Usually our philosophy from a product development is we create a product, the first one that comes to market is expensive, then reiterate, improve it, find a way to make it more affordable, and then also look at opportunities to really partner with the government and LDCs to unlock and make it available to other, and it's not just us. We firmly believe that the overall market of smart thermostats should grow. There's a huge potential of growth. So we really support customer choice and programs that actually benefit Nest and Ecobee and Honeywell as well. That is something that we really stand behind.
I had a question, if I can ask a question.
Absolutely.
Just with these voice the smart thermostats, what is the sort of penetration rate in Ontario relative to other jurisdictions, and what would be the difference?
Well, with a big shout out and thank you to the IESO and Greenon for their recent funding, yes. There are 150,000 more smart thermostats in Ontario than there was probably about 9 to 12 months ago. But from the standpoint of penetration, we're somewhere around 10% of homes on average, but I don't know where.
And how does that compare to other jurisdictions?
That's the overall arching
okay.
penetration, and so Ontario would certainly be there. I mean, for Ecobee, we have a very, very high penetration of smart thermostats in Ontario, hundreds of thousands.
It's definitely a big thank you. The program that I actually green on and IESO has done in Ontario is quite unique in North America, and we really do have to thank, because it's quite, it was innovative and represented a leadership and just really a view of looking at the customers and how can you help them have access to the technology. It's still in the beginning stages. There's a huge opportunity for the smart home products to really penetrate, and really what the view is that we're looking at bringing as many products into people's homes, as many, we consider them sensors, and there are a variety. Thermostats, could be camera, et cetera, and then how they work together and how do they provide value and insights to the LDCs and as well as to consumers, and that we're still far away from that value chain to be realized. That's how we see it.
So far away in terms of moving forward without government funding? Is that what
Yes. We're still, I'd say, a few, not even know, 5. There's still quite a lot of opportunity for the government to actually fund, because these thermostats do help with energy efficiency, do help with demand response on the low income end. We could provide a very, very, very affordable cost regardless of the volume to get penetration. So I think it helps. That's why we look at partnership, because it helps us, but it also helps the overall government and the industry in general. And obviously, it's a win-win. And that's something that the technology company has done for a long time. It's the concept of competitors, like they're competitors, and also we're working together. And we're sort of taking that approach to other industries, including electricity.
Since nobody's passed me any notes, and I don't see anybody up at either one of the microphones, I guess I'll continue. There's one area that I think was raised this morning with Patty in her speech, and a couple of the panelists I think have mentioned as well. With the examples of the innovative products and services that we're thinking about here, they engage the topic of customer data, data that would be valuable to others who could use it for their own purposes. Can you give us a sense maybe of both the opportunities that exist in this area and potentially some of the risks that might exist as well? And I'm thinking about things that we might have seen in the popular press not that long ago about some of the mitigating those risks, like the Facebook issue a month ago or 2 months ago. Can you give us any sense of what you see happening with the customer data, opportunities and risks?
Sure. PII and security is first and foremost in our minds when it comes to customer data. And I won't go through the lengthy discussion of what we do to protect that on the thermostat. Data is powerful. And so that's why we make our data, our customers' data available to our utility partners through APIs. We believe that it helps understanding the success of programs, maybe through EM&V, but it also empowers our utility partners and other program partners to make better decisions. So the customer agrees to the sharing of that data in aggregate, and it's something that we've taken one step further, where we have a donate your data, which is a customer can push a little button on their mobile app or on their web portal, and that data goes to research firms across North America to be able to use. We have tens of thousands of customers who have done that. I think we're up to like 80,000 customers. So data is critical, data is powerful, data is important, and we have to treat it respectfully.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. CCAs in California have a right to all customer data that is held by the incumbent utilities, but we are really in the very early stages of being able to use it productively.
All I was going to say is I think the IESO is working on developing ways to use data right now, which is really an important initiative. But also, I think going forward, there's always going to be concerns with respect to privacy and security and that kind of thing that everybody's got to keep their thumb on.
I see we do have one question from the microphone. We'll go to the floor.
Was there a comment that you wanted to make before I ask my question?
I do want to make a comment about the data. I want to say that from Nest and Google perspective, PII, personal identifiable information, is actually very important, and it's key to how we manage our business. we believe that the customer actually is in control of that data. We are very happy to work with partners to create insights and provide information that allows them to act. We, and Google has taken a different approach than Facebook in terms of sharing that data. The actual data is not shared. It's the insights that are derived out of that, could be shared under, obviously, consent and et cetera, et cetera. Has been, there are points in time when that could have been, and it was detrimental to some of the partners and the businesses, and we lost it, but at the same time, in the light what happened with Facebook, it just reinforced how Google really looks and perceives the data. There are very clear benchmarks and sets in place. I would not have access to the customer data for either partner or utilities, although I'm the one working and designing the product, the program as an overall. We think how we perceive data and how we, the framework that is going to exist at regulatory level, the way companies are going to treat it is going to become really, really important. At the same time, it's interesting to see that the younger generation doesn't have the same concept towards privacy as we have, and they're so more likely to actually share the data. So there's a definitely interesting point in time how we're going to treat it. But yes, data at this point is power, and businesses are going to exist based on the data.
So my question is geared to the folks from Ecobee and Google in particular. I appreciate that the voice is really the technology of the future, but in the context of innovation and accessibility, I was curious as to how you would actually also think about technology in the context of those who actually can't use their voice, so sign language. I'm just curious as to where you see that going.
We do have some of the thermostats allow for people, sort of a choice for people who are not able to use voice. The reality is that the way of engaging with digital products that existed up to the point of voice are still going to continue, and those are choices for the people who can use voice. It's just going to expand. Voice will be an additional channel. So and it's the same sort of a conversation, I would say, to people who are not able to see. And now they are going to be helped because voice is available. So it just opens the choice.
Yeah, I'd also say don't discount cameras. Like we're talking about smart thermostats, but if you look at the prevalence of cameras in the home, like last Black Friday, Amazon, so I probably should have said this earlier, full disclosure, Amazon is an investor in Ecobee. The amount of products, I think it was something like 15 or 18 products they brought out with cameras in them. We're talking things that are in people's bedrooms. So the acceptance of cameras in homes now is much more palatable by North American consumers, and it's impacted the whole, what we used to call security business. For 25 years, the security business in North America never could penetrate more than 25% of U.S. households, so it was always a game of reducing churn and trying to upsell your existing customers. Then some brilliant marketer came up with the idea of, hey, don't call it security, call it monitoring. And then, boom, it took off. And so to those people that, may have challenges communicating in certain ways, I think there are technologies that are absolutely out there for them. And I think cameras will play a role in that.
Thank you.
I'm watching Rob's growing discomfort as we're multiple minutes into the red light zone on the little monitor here, so I'm assuming we're done. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the panel. Thank you very much, panel. Really appreciated your comments. Very insightful. Thank you.
And let me add to that. Thank you. And we'll start our break now. So we will probably cut a couple minutes off that. So please stay tuned for the 5-minute warning. And we'll see you back here soon. To move 360 some odd people away from coffee and away from conversation, but we are going to try to do that. So, hey, gold star to everyone who came back on time. So, as everyone is making their way back into the room, what I would really like to do now is introduce our next speaker. So the next speaker that we have today is Michel Lozier, who joins us from New Brunswick Power. And, you know, when we started to first reach out to Michel, and we started to reach out to him about the project that they were doing, Power Shift Atlantic project, what he told us, and even in talking with him just a few minutes ago, is they're doing so much more now on consumer engagement and partnerships. There was just so much that they have to share with us today. So would you please join with me now in welcoming Michel to the stage?
Thank you, and thanks for having us here. So I'm going to take folks on a quick journey through some of the things that are going on in New Brunswick and NB Power. And again, we're just getting started. And like anyone, this is a marathon and not a sprint, and we're on it. So links to Patty this morning. I'm on the board of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative. Being relevant and present in our customers' lives, very important. Also the panel, you know, an engaged community, new value-added solution, and a lot of this starts with the customer. So I'll get into a little bit of that. But I remember a few years back in rooms like this, about 8 to 10 years ago, we started the Power Shift Atlantic project. Rooms were half full, and they were mostly scientists and PhDs. I mean, nothing against scientists and PhDs, but what we see here today is a full room with a fully represented ecosystem, and it includes regulatory folks. And that's impressive. That means we're making strides. There's consumer advocates, there's, you know, utilities, ESCOs, academia, financing, municipalities. Municipalities are starting to come to these conferences. That's really important. We'll talk a bit about that. But today is about thinking different. It's about innovation. So the challenge I often put out there when we look at a day like today is, let's pretend we didn't have the system that we have. Let's pretend we don't have the massive generation system and all the wires that we've built, which is amazing. But let's pretend for a moment we didn't have that, and we had to start from scratch. Because that's the type of thinking we need to do. So, you know, what's new today? We've got climate change. We've got, you know, customers looking for resilience. There's major things happening. Evolving technology, new advanced solutions, and new players with great solutions and really making attractive propositions to customers. Evolving energy consumers, digital, always on. That didn't exist when we designed this system. So when we start to think different, that's the challenge we have today. That's the one I'd like to leave you with. It will not be a like-for-like replacement. I think this is the sweet spot. And I mean, this may be, you know, a bit cliche, but the bottom line is it's at the intersection between technology and humanities. And how do we add value? So many of us know the world we come from is a world of safe, reliable, and efficient. And we're shifting to comfort, convenience, and choice. We're really good at safe, reliable, and efficient. We're so good at it, we spend a lot of time at it. Probably too much today. We need to spend more time in comfort, convenience, and choice. and customers and where they're going. The world's changing. So how can we rethink our entire ecosystem? It's not just the utility, it's the entire ecosystem. How do we challenge everyone in this room to really come together and say, how do we be bold with our leadership and provide new solutions to customers? Engaging, so today I'll talk about the new energy consumer a little bit, some of what we're doing at NB Power, a little bit on our journey at NB Power, but I'm going to flip through some slides pretty quickly. But we're looking at a managed transition from a commodity provider to a value-added energy solutions provider. That's the vision that we have. And we're transforming really from electrons to energy solutions, from a commodity to an energy solution provider. So when we look at NB Power, our vision is sustainable energy, electricity for future generations, and customers as partners. So about NB Power, we're a vertically integrated utility. Most people would know that. 394,000 customers, 50% rural and urban. We target 40% renewables by 2020. We're a winter peaker, 3,100 megawatts. We summer peak about 1,700 megawatts. We balance 500 megawatts of wind. We supply PEI. I'm rapid firing here because I think I want to get this base set. Nuclear 25%, coal 20%. Renewables, including large hydro, around 38%, and then we have gas and other. We peak with oil. So we're the delivery agent for energy efficiency solutions in New Brunswick at NB Power, which gives us an advantage. We're pre-AMI. We're at the regulator with an AMI business case. We're doing home energy reports to our customers. We have a residential flat rate at 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a challenge. But it's also an opportunity, I guess. And we're partnered with Siemens. So it gives you a bit of a perspective on what's going on at NB Power. We're a winter peaker, 3,100 megawatts, morning peak. Half of that is electric heat. Electricity rates truly matter in New Brunswick. I think they matter everywhere, but they really matter where we are because electricity intensity is high. If you looked at the previous slide, Nova Scotia peaks at 2,000 megawatts, same amount of customers. It's just a lot less electric heat. We're at 3,100. 150 coincidental peak electric hot water heating of that 3,100. So how do we offset new build, reduce fossil fuel dependency, and better integrate renewables going forward? Because that's the goal. Our vision as a utility is on the long haul, is really offsetting new build and bringing new value-added solutions, win-win solutions to our regulator that are good for our customer, but also good for the overall system. So again, this is a transformation. When we look at a next 25-year run, and we look at those the two, I believe they're red, I'm a little bit colorblind there, but the two lines that they show, we're demonstrating that we want to reduce by over 620 megawatts of capacity by 2042 and 2 terawatt hours. Our system is 14 terawatt hours today. So, you know, we've got a marginal growth of about 0.5% shown there. So how do we do that? By reducing and shifting demand going forward, offsetting new build. We have a 3-year integrated plan that we just gave to the regulator, $82 million, 72 megawatts of reduction, and 260 gigawatt hours. That's a combined energy efficiency DR, integrated resource plan, going towards these targets. So this is part of the plan that we've put forward. So in order to do this, we must meet our objectives. We need to think different, and we need to shift from a unidirectional pipeline business to that of a modern 21st century platform model. So, you know, from electrons flowing one way to platforms. And I think what we'll end up with is as we see here in the vision paper that I read yesterday from the Distributors Association, you know, networks, enablers of new solutions where customers have choice and can get a more personalized energy experience. Our industry will not be spared from the evolution of platforms. It is the future. When we talk about think different, we need to think like that. And that's new thinking. It's not unlike our digital platforms, Uber, Airbnb. Now, electricity, mind you, is a little more complex. But even with solar, one can become a net user to a net provider overnight, similar to your home becoming a hotel or your vehicle becoming a taxi. Net user to net provider overnight. We're no different. So the game's changing. So safe, reliable, efficient doesn't go away. We'll need to continue that. But we need to reposition ourselves to meet an evolving energy consumer experience. And we're all talking about that this morning. So this will require modernized grid and engage customers. So going from pipeline to platform business. How do we do that? we're still going to need to supply a commodity product for quite some time. But we need to shift. Again, we're all digital creatures. Customers' expectations are evolving. I think Patty mentioned a lot of that this morning. And they want a digital experience, not unlike with banks. So how are we doing? Low cost is still very important when we look at value streams, but it's not the only thing. I mean, people are looking for reliability, resilience. We had an ice storm last year, 13-day ice storm. The last 5 days was minus 20 degrees. I called my father halfway through that ice storm. He said, you know, he said, there's nothing people value more than the well-being of their family. People will spend money there. People will go beyond the commodity when it comes to solutions like that. People are talking about biomass. People are talking about generators. People are talking about solar and storage. Some of those things aren't quite affordable yet, but customers are thinking different because resilience is now a huge value proposition. So how do we think different and get someone through a 13-day power outage? Those are real solutions for real people with technology. How do we do that? How do we think different? It's beyond the commodity. The commodity's down. So that's the challenge. It's a new day. And that's just one. Cleaner, comfort, convenience, choice, new energy solutions, but solving real problems for real people. That's what we have to get to. These are people solutions with technology. We as an industry have provided lots of technology solutions for people. But this is a different way of thinking. So at NB Power, we're merging 3 platforms: a physical grid, a digital platform, and a social platform. And again, we're working at this. We don't have this all figured out. We're working like everybody else. But Energy Smart NB is what we've coined as an umbrella term for all of it. And it captures our transformation and a progressive shift towards grid modernization, smart grid, smart habits, energy efficiency, and smart solutions. So adding value and choice for our customers and shifting our business models over time to capture new revenue streams and add value. So again, you know, we have a number of strategic partnerships emerging: Siemens, Sinope, IBM. We've done work with Ecobee with our smart homes, Add Energy for charging, etc. So we're growing in our strategic partnerships. But these are win-win solutions we're looking for that we need to take to the regulator and demonstrate this is good for the customer and it's good for the overall system. So that's what we need to do going forward. And again, this is not intuitive for employees either. Energy efficiency is great for NB Power going forward. It's part of our long-term vision and our customers. So it takes time to get that through. I'm just going to go flip through a quick few slides here. Smart grid, digitizing our grid, two-way information, robust digital communication. I think people know this. AMI, we need the AMI. We need data going forward. Critical. Enables more customer choice and prevention shortens outages. I think those are things people know. Smart habits, energy efficiency. We're doubling our investment in energy efficiency. For a lot of people in our province, it starts right there. Education, awareness, a progressive experience like we talked about earlier. How do we get people engaged and help them save money, perhaps give them more comfort? And it is beyond just money, more and more. So incentives to shift and get people involved. And I think really try to feel like help to our customers. The next one is smart solutions, and this is an evolving trend that we're seeing, that new partnerships, new products and services, EV charging, thermostats, hot water heating solutions, smart home bundles, etc. So we'll go through a few slides that demonstrate this. One of the things we're seeing is our Energy Innovation Center, Smart Solutions. We're doing a lot of work on smart thermostats. We demonstrated, and for the most part they've been demonstrations, but we've done 600 homes with smart thermostats where we preheat the homes from 5 to 6 in the morning and ride through the peaks. And we're looking to get about 4 kilowatts per home. We ended up getting around 2. We're working with the National Research Council and Siemens on this pilot. So we've seen some progressive results. But, you know, again, so those are things that we're looking at: solar and storage subdivision project, e-charge network, LED street lighting, Eco Peak water heaters. So we're looking at a series of C&I demand response of I guess, distributed energy resource projects that really, you know, I think they help customers. They add value to our customers, but they also add value to the overall system. So again, it's progressively moving down that road. I'm going to go through the next few slides on some of the the distributed energy resources we've got out there. This is our e-charge network. It's a level 3 network. This gets rid of the range anxiety, but we realize 80% of charging happens at home and at work. That's the stuff we're going to go after to tie to our energy management system through Siemens, through the DEMS, because that's the stuff that will have some controllability and some variability. This one here is just gets rid of the range anxiety. We're well covered, I think as well covered as any province, distance-wise, for a level 3 network. We're also bolstering our level 2. Smart lighting solutions, I won't go into detail here, but we've transferred all the lighting across New Brunswick to LED lighting, shaved 7 megawatts off a morning peak. Dobson Landing, this is a solar storage connected community in Riverview where we have state-of-the-art modern homes, solar, modern systems, highly efficient. EcoBee's part of this project, and we're looking at storage as well and modeling, and we will own the storage and find a way to really give the customers the value they want, but also extract the value we need from it. So just a couple of quick, the homes are smart. We see here, they got progressive windows from the inside. They're modern. Again, I'll just flip quick here. You've got a dual ducted heat pump system that's got the air delivery system within, heat recovery. It's controlled by one central thermostat, EcoBee. We've got a heat pump water heater, electric vehicle charging in the homes. This is a whole subdivision that has this concept. So, these communities are evolving and developers are showing up. So there's opportunity to keep expanding. Modern appliances. And next one, I guess, is we're adding 80 megawatts of small-scale community wind energy, 40 megawatts from Aboriginal. That's going on right now. So we have 300 megawatts of wind in New Brunswick. We're going to 400. Again, we min around 1,200 megawatts. So if you get 1,200 megawatts on and you're balancing 500 to 600 megawatts of wind, I think I don't have to explain to people in this room. It can get a little dicey, so that's the kind of stuff we're doing. But the target we have is 40% renewable by 2020. So I guess looking at a new look and feel for NB Power, and we talk about marketing and rebranding, and when we use words like that in a utility, regulators sometimes think that that's not what we do, but that's what we need to start doing. When we talk about thinking differently, when we're going to be attractive and relevant to customers and try to solve real problems for real customers, it comes down to understanding the customer and letting them know that we're more than just electrons. So this requires a whole new way of thinking within our utility, and it's not really in the vernacular, in the culture yet, but we're working it, and we're working it within NB Power. New partnerships are now critical, so that our new look and feel, we're really repositioning and rebranding NB Power. Bit on the smart habits, a new look and feel. We've refreshed everything. We want modern look. And also, what's going to get people's attention. And I think we need to spend more time as an industry doing that kind of thing. Knowing our customers, segmentation, personas, really getting, like we heard the Googles and the EcoBees, those people know their customers, and they know more about our customers than we know about our customers. So how are we going to get better at that? What strategic partnerships do we need? Energy efficiency markets, we're leveraging the smart energy consumer collaborative data and research, but we also do our own research to supplement it, and it's been very helpful because there are some trends that are more macro in nature, but then you got to try to bring it home and say, okay, how does that work here? Brand health surveys, public opinion, we need to continue that and continue to evolve. Advertising new partnerships. We're working with the Department of Tourism on looking to recharge in New Brunswick. So in their flyers or on their website, when people go there, they're looking for a place to charge their EVs. So we really need to build those partnerships and continue to do that. And that's why I say when we talk about marketing and sales, it's getting out there, it's being relevant, it's being present, but not in the old way that you show up with a utility pamphlet. Nobody reads those. You go where people go. People go to these things when they're traveling. So how do we do that? We have to think different. So, we're just learning it like everybody else. I'll say that. So culture change, really important. Much of this starts on the inside within the company. How do we get employees themselves to see this and be part of this? What we did with PowerShift Atlantic is we took 3 I&C techs out of a power plant, and they built a virtual power plant and did a fantastic job. Now they're fully engaged in this new world. Same trade, new place. Pretty cool, right? That's what we got to do. It's the same people. They just have to be part of that future and see themselves as part of that future. So leading by example is really key, but it's not a given. We've got some things that, beyond safe, reliable, and efficient. We're talking about fail fast and innovate. We're talking about customer at the center, customer centricity, leadership principles we're encouraging, collaboration, and working across silos. Really, really important. Like, we heard about collaboration with communities. We're hearing a lot more about that. How do we collaborate within our own? How do we bust the walls of how we work, and how do we get more of a network effect within our companies and become more effective? So we're investing pretty heavily in that with Cotter methodology called Accelerate. So a couple of last slides here. Collaborative innovation, I think, is the way forward, and we talk about ecosystem innovation. And I show you this Harvard Business Review article. It's called Ecosystem Innovation, and it's from 2017, last year in the fall. It's an awesome article on it takes an entire ecosystem to make this transformation. So technology is converging really fast, and it's bringing new possibilities really fast. The challenge we have is people don't converge quite as quickly. Like, we're not converging with the cities as fast as we should. We're not converging with the startups as fast as we should. We're stuck in the old model. So we need to think different. So how do we do that? Well, we need to build new relationships. There's a whole new supply chain that's evolving. We need to build, we need to strengthen, and there are some we don't even know we need yet because things are evolving. This iPhone that we have is the new street light. It adds tremendous value to a city. We happen to own the street lights. The technology's converged us, but we've got to work with the city to pull that convergence together and bring value. And maybe we share the cost, but it's a new day. It's a whole new way of thinking. But that's the whole ecosystem. That takes regulatory policy. It takes, collaborative innovation. It takes what's working together in a different way. I spend way too much time in my office. I don't know about you guys. Way too much time. And that's the kind of thing we need to think about. Cities, utilities, academia, going from silos to networks. So again, networking is critical, and we're all part of it. Customers as partners, a progressive experience. I think this is critical. We're going to see, this always on customer. We heard about it this morning. Our job is providing this going forward. So I'd like to end on this. I really believe this is our opportunity. Some people say give customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. There's a lot of solutions that we don't even know about yet, but we need to create those and add value, and then people will come. So how do we do that? I think we need to think different. So in closing, this is about thinking different. I think we're on a marathon, not a sprint. We're like everybody else. We're just working this. We have a great vision. We got a lot of work left to do. And I think we need to continue on the safe, reliable, efficient. We need that, but we need to think a whole lot more about the comfort, convenience, and choice of the business and where it's going, and leading to a lower carbon future. So, I've been asked to set the stage for the panel. I hope that was part of it. And thank you.
Michelle, we do thank you for that, and thank you for just taking us through your experience, your model on what it means to empower the consumer, and to remind us all that we're all still learning, right? It's still a work in progress. So with that, I'd love to call the rest of the panel up to join Michelle here on stage. And while I do that, while everyone comes up, I'm going to introduce the moderator, Jessica Savage, who is the Director of Corporate and Indigenous Relations at the IESO. And she comes to this group after spending some time in operations and market development and government and regulatory affairs. So with that, I'll hand it over, Jessica, to you.
Thanks, Rob. So I am going to try and be a little bit innovative today by introducing some Slido questions as part of this, opinion questions as part of this round. So I was really looking forward to being the second moderator because I was hoping to see how Colin made out, but he's left that to me. So Thank you. So we'll do some Slido questions, and I've also got some preset questions that I will ask to kick it off, but I really strongly encourage people to please come forward and ask questions at the microphone. I noticed in the last round we didn't get a chance to go through that, but we'd really like to hear from you, so please don't be shy. So introducing the panelists. So we've got Michelle, who spoke to us, Executive Director of Energy Efficiency and Community Engagement for New Brunswick Power. One of the things I had asked the panelists, rather than me just reading through the bios that you all can read, is just give me a fun fact. And Michelle's was that he loves playing guitar and jamming with friends, as well as being active outdoors on early mornings while many are still sleeping. So I can attest to that because we were supposed to meet in person this morning before the panel to get to know each other, and apparently he was still on his early morning jog. And as you notice, he made an analogy to, we are in a marathon right now, not a sprint. So yes, clearly an avid runner. We've also got John Norman. John has nearly 20 years of experience in the power industry, management consulting, and government. Currently, he's president and COO at Hydrostore Incorporated, an international leading company in advanced compressed air gas storage. He previously held senior roles at Brookfield Asset Management, most recently as the VP responsible for regulatory policy and government relations across North America for the power and utilities business. So John's fun fact was that he really wanted to be a journalist, but instead became an engineer. So we won't hold that against you. It's funny that my background is actually in economics, but somehow I continue to be drawn into the operations world at the IESO System Control Center, so we should talk. And then finally, we've got Teresa Sarkeesian. She's the president and CEO of the Electricity Distributors Association, whose membership encompasses approximately 63 regulated electricity distributors in Ontario. She has 25 years' experience in policy development and advocacy gained through experience in the government and the private sector. She joined the EA in 2009 as VP of Government and Member Affairs, and she's been involved in all of the association's major policy efforts since then. Now, Teresa's fun fact is quite interesting. So she shared with us that about a year ago, she and her partner built a brand new house, and it was after the fact that she realized that she didn't qualify for any of the rebates from her LDC.
You should do something about it.
So I'm going to let John and Teresa do a few opening remarks, and then we'll to the questions.
Sure, thank you. My name is John Norman, as Jessica indicated. I work for Hydrostore. So we are an advanced, and I'll explain what I mean by advanced, compressed air energy storage company, and based here in Toronto. So we're sort of an interesting company from an Ontario perspective because, you know, we're sort of born and raised here in the Ontario electricity system. Most of our work is actually international. Our advanced case, and I'll just use case as a shorthand for compressed air energy storage, it's really a bulk scale storage solution. So we provide 50 to 300 megawatts plus of energy storage, really long duration, 12 hours plus, even up to 24 hours to help level renewable generation and provide sort of dispatchable renewable products. And the interesting thing about our technology that makes it a bit more advanced is we, unlike other forms of case, don't use any natural gas. We've built the world's first and are building the world's second adiabatic, which means no fuel, compressed air energy system here in Ontario. And we have a pipeline of probably about 1,500 megawatts of projects around Australia, California, the Midwestern U.S., and other provinces in Canada in addition to Ontario. And what's interesting technology as well is we actually purpose build a cavity underground. So usually when you're doing case, you're actually relying on kind of an existing salt cavity that's there already, not always located really where you need it. Our advantage is that our starting point is where do you need it on the grid? Then we can actually construct and do screenings accordingly, which is very much the process that we're in many of these other jurisdictions. We're about 35 people here in Toronto. So I think as we go through this panel, and I very much feel privileged to be part of the discussion, some themes that all come back are really around innovation. Obviously, we're going to talk more about that, but electricity is a fairly regulated sector. I think a lot of jurisdictions struggle with innovative, disruptive technologies, and how do we factor that into a way of thinking that really is about predicting the future and making it clearly recover costs, and how do we approach that? So certainty is always important. I think the other theme that I want to talk about a fair amount is the need to think long-term and about flexibility, or in some circles they sort of use the term adaptive infrastructure. And I think sometimes in the power industry we can get somewhat hung up into political cycles. We're obviously in a new one now in Ontario. We can get hung up on the immediate needs, and we tend to think in very static lines. And I think we all hit upon these sort of themes and the importance of them, but what I'd like to really drill down on the panel is how do we do that? And I will try to leverage some of our experience internationally and lessons learned and how we apply that. But I'll sort of bring in the perspective of the energy storage industry to this panel.
Thanks, John. Teresa?
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the IESO for including the EDA on the agenda today. So far, it's been a really great event, and I've been learning a lot. Just a little bit of data on who is the EDA. We are the provincial association that represents Ontario's electric distributors. Currently, they're serving approximately 5 million customers in Ontario through 10,000 employees and approximately manage $8 billion in assets. The EDA is effectively an advocacy association, so I'm probably a little bit more of a policy wonk than my colleagues on the panel today, although John Norman's had his days as being a policy wonk in government.
We did it together.
Yeah, well, yes. John and I worked on a number of policy issues, so it's nice to be on a panel with old friends. But I've only been CEO at the EDA for a couple of years, and when I took over the leadership at the EDA, the board asked me a question. They said, is there something missing in our business plan? This was back in 2016. And I said, yes, I think we need to have an industry thought leadership response to all this about grid defection and the death spiral of utilities. And as a result, we worked with our board, and at that time with Navigant, and we created a vision paper for the sector called The Power to Connect, Advancing Customer-Driven Electricity Solutions for Ontario. And we had basically 3 pillars in that paper, trying to move the LDC sector to respond more to the dramatically changing customer demands for more customer curation and distributed energy resources. So the 3 main pillars are to move the industry forward to enable the integration of DER assets safe, reliably onto the distribution grid. That also includes providing more visibility into what does that distribution energy resource look like in terms of its impact on not only the DX system, but also the broader electricity grid. The next phase is to own and operate DER. Right now, LDCs can own and operate certain distributed energy assets in Ontario, but we're seeking removal of some of the barriers in terms of size with regard to that. We also want to look at opportunities for control. It might be a little bit more controversial for some of the participants in the audience today, but we think that one of the value facets is going to be the ability for a DER asset to benefit not only that consumer who's installed it, but more broadly the distribution and electricity system grid. And the third phase is to move LDCs with enhanced visibility into something where PHINOs, a facilitated integrated network orchestrator, are almost like little mini IESOs. We think it's really important to provide sightlines for the IESO in a future vision going forward. So what we did in 2018 is we then released a second paper, which was our roadmap. What are the barriers to LDC coming, the PHINOs, or the little mini IESOs in the future, and what are solutions? I think this is particularly timely as we have a new administration here in Ontario. They're going to be looking for solutions, primarily around affordability and reliability to the system. And I think that the role of the IESO is helping be an enabler, a facilitator of DER to try to respond to a customer result is going to be a key role that we can play. So I don't really want to talk any longer because I'm sensitive to time, and I know you want to get into barriers, which I can address later.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to kick off the first question just by drawing on some comments that Michel made earlier. He noted that as an industry, we're really good at safety, reliability, and efficiency, and now we need to focus more on comfort, convenience, and choice. So with that in mind, the question I pose to the panel is, how are evolving consumer values helping to drive DER deployment?
So I can start off on that. I do think you mentioned customer choice, and I think Michel was talking about that quite a bit. I think that is legitimately a big shift in the industry. I mean, this used to be a very top-down planned sector. It still is to a large degree. But because of the technology change and the availability of distributed resources, really at price points that are quite attractive, even on their own economic merits, that's really changed the need industry, not only in Ontario, but everywhere over the past 10 years, even 5 years. And so when you think about the drivers behind that, well, a lot of it is distributed resources themselves. If you look at solar panels, for example, I see price solar panels down around levelized costs of $20 to $25 a megawatt hour. So this is very much a resource you want to take advantage of. At the same time, by its very nature of being distributed, the availability of these technologies, including storage technologies and smart grid technologies, customers the ability to have more control over what their energy decisions in future are. Now, what I would add to that is I actually think other important value streams that are sort of evolving are even at the bulk system level. So I think even with that shift to distributed energy, there's still a need for new thinking on the bulk electricity system. If I had to, put that into two categories that are sort of relevant for the dialogue at the IESO even these days, flexibility is one that's very much evolving. It used to be, you get specific products, and there wasn't a need for as much flexible, quick responding infrastructure. We all know the reasons why that are driving that. There are several. Certainly the intermittent nature of a lot of these distributed resources is part of that. I would tack on a piece to that being that there is a need to kind of think long-term about the system and the value to the customer ultimately of capacity. And that's obviously a debate that's happening now in the IESO, and there are discussions around an incremental capacity auction, for example. But tying those things together, those two things provide value to the end customer. It's really about flexible capacity. How do you move forward on that? And the last sort of theme of value streams, I think, is just, we would be remiss not to mention the environment in this. Obviously, political cycles shift. We're in a new political Ontario. Even with the Trump administration in the U.S., I used to do a lot of regulatory and government work down there. I don't think anybody has really thrown climate change off the table. It's just mostly a fact amongst the industry, and most serious investors and big global companies that invest in power infrastructure, they're not rushing out to build a bunch of coal plants, right, regardless of that current regulatory environment. And I think that ultimately this is a critical driver, Because as we think in Ontario about where we're going and how are we looking at decarbonization, is it being driven by the customer and value, but it's just being driven by facts. And it'll be interesting as we go through some of the other question points for the panel to just think about what that's meant in other jurisdictions and how they've actually adopted or not even necessarily done a great job at adapting for moving away from fossil infrastructure. Like we look to power markets in the U.S. as being kind of a model for our own electricity market. I don't think that's the right model, but I'll get back to that as well.
Thanks, Jess. So looking at how the value streams are going to evolve, and we are in that transformation right now. Many people are looking at this globally, as some of the other panelists have mentioned. So Ontario is not unique in grappling with the issue, but obviously due to various legislative and regulatory structures, people's approaches are going to look a little different, whether you're looking at the New York REV model or where California is going. Everyone's going to be different. But some of the thoughts that we have in our thought leadership paper is that we really need to have clear incentives for customers. Everybody is going to be engaging in DER, for example. But for those that want to engage, we think it's really important that there is going to be a strategic deployment of DER. So it's supposed to benefit a whole value chain, that being the customer, the DX system, the electricity grid more broadly in terms of the bulk. And, even to John's point, looking at broader externalities as well. Regardless of what the new administration may want to do on cap and trade or carbon tax, there's a global movement to a lower carbon environment. And perhaps we should be looking at that as well to create the right incentives, to right behavior, to right size the system. So we have looked at this concept of locational marginal pricing and saying what are the benefits to the electricity system, and also a consideration for future discussion on looking at those broader externalities we think will be helpful in getting that value stacking for the future.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I think value is really, like we were saying earlier, I think it really depends on the customer, and really knowing our customers better is really critical. And they're not a monolith, as Patty explained this morning. Like, we've got green champions and some folks that are really encouraged by the renewable movement. Some want to save money. But to know that more intuitively, I think, is critical. I also think we're going to decommoditize this business. I mean, the telcos went through this where, like look what we're paying today for communication versus perhaps what we were in the past. But they've decommoditized, so it becomes about value, not just about low cost when you decommoditize. If you value resilience and riding through a 12-day power outage, you might pay for that. That's beyond the commodity. It's new thinking. It's not a cent per kilowatt hour conversation. It's what do you value? So how do we shift that conversation within our industry? So out there and position value. Because we don't all buy the cheapest car. We buy the car we value. So we've commoditized this business, and it's going to take time to change that conversation. But that's a critical piece of where we're going. Things people value, life continuity, business continuity, those things are critical. Like, look at the digital. It's, you got 3 or 4 day power outage. They can't even talk to each other. It's like, it's a bad day. It's a bad day, yeah. And, they'll tell you about that. And, and business continuity. I heard a guy tell us the other day, I'll be 100% reliable with and or without the utility by 2025. Because that's what he values, and he'll spend money there. Because commodity, again, so getting more acquainted and connected. And I agree with what you said. I think oftentimes we stand at XYZ with that future solution, but we've got a lot of customers that are perhaps at ABC or DEF or GHI, and we've got to go pick them up where they are. And we've got to show them a progressive experience, and oftentimes it's education and engagement, then it's energy efficiency. So you save someone $600 to $1,000 a year, and there's a lot of customers like that in Ontario, as in New Brunswick, year after year on a 3-year payback. Well, 3 years from now, they can take that $1,000 and invest it in renewables when prices drop. So I think there's a way, but to really connect with people and feel like help, and engage, like I think Patty was saying this morning, start that conversation digitally, and be there. So yeah, cleaner, business continuity, resilience, and getting really beyond the commodity in our conversation, I think, is critical.
Thank you. So this is where we get interactive and innovative. Alexa, can you please bring up the first Slido question? Yes. So we're looking to hear from you. Pick up your phones. Can you please rate your agreement with the following scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 10, strongly agree? Enough is being done to prepare Ontario's electricity system for large-scale DER deployment. I'll give you a few more seconds. I forgot to mention at the outset that my idea for fun facts came from recently watching Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. My 10-year-old has become addicted, and now I'm wishing I had the Jeopardy music going in the background.
Everyone can see it, right?
Well, looking pretty static. At 3 is kind of the mid-range. So this feeds into question for the panel about barriers and opportunities. I know this is what Teresa was really keen to talk about. So what are the main barriers to DER implementation in Ontario? And what should be done to address these barriers? Are there lessons we can learn from other jurisdictions? So we'll start with you, Teresa.
In our vision, identified what I call our 5 main buckets of barriers, and then we expanded out to 9 with 15 solutions. I'm not going to try and get through all of that today because that's probably a 2-day conversation, but I'll just highlight a few areas. And as much as there's barriers, I do want to, give a nod to the fact that there's a lot of good things happening. Everything from the distribution system plans to the integrated regional planning process, the market renewal. I think there's a lot of good conversations starting to happen, but as some people say, planning for tomorrow is great, but tomorrow is actually today. So we could faster. But nonetheless, I mean, there are barriers going forward. So, a few that I think that are important is the definitions of DERs are a bit limited currently under legislation and various codes. The focus is really on renewables. I don't want to say to the exclusion of energy storage, but it's coming on strong, and I think we need to look at where storage fits into the definition of DER and how it fits into the grid in terms of both load and generation, since it sort of has 2 unique profiles. I mentioned grid visibility. We don't really have a great grid visibility right now. It's something that utilities are working on. We need to make sure those resources get rate-based in our future applications because A, we need sight lines on our customers, and B, the IESO needs a sight line on the LDCs to say what's going on with your customers behind the meter. I think that that's going to be something very important. I mentioned the pricing structure, so I'm not going to. I also think the procurement policy, as much as we've had this system where it's been primarily a centralized procurement process, I think on a go-forward basis to be able to respond to the challenges that the regional plans and distribution system plans identify, with servicing. I think you're going to see a move towards a more decentralized procurement process, or a combination, more of a hybrid, where you'd have centralized and decentralized procurements. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the LDCs and other parties playing a role in procuring for either local requirements or regional planning requirements. So those are just a few thoughts I had in terms of some of the barriers, but I hate to say it, there are more. I just don't have time to get into it.
John, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. And I would, I guess on the one hand, I sort of echo the audience's sentiment. I think I would probably say, but I'll explain why. I do echo Teresa's sentiment about good things that have happened in this sector. I mean, if you do take a step back, Ontario has a fairly decarbonized electricity system, like much more so than many other jurisdictions in North America. It's been a bumpy road to get there. There's been controversy Maybe it hasn't been done as efficiently as it could be, but that's where we are. So as we're thinking about going forward, I like to think what's really incrementally important to that. And DER is an interesting term because, there's a bunch, it kind of becomes a euphemism for other things like resources or renewable resources, but really it's a bit broader than that. I think there are two opportunities for Ontario going forward that are really critical for us to get as an industry into our DNA. One is that if we already have a decarbonized electricity system, despite current or even neighboring administrations, that decarbonization will continue to be important because it's going to be driven outside Ontario anyways. We really need to be thinking about how we leverage this electricity system to decarbonize the sectors that really, really matter now, like transportation, potentially the housing sector as well. And I know we talk about that, but I think we have to internalize that as a challenge and opportunity for the future, because it's really leveraging a good product and trying to make the entire province better. The second piece, and I'll maybe refer back to a comment that I had made, was just we have to recognize, I'm not sure it's really internalized in our institutions here, that solar panels or wind turbines from 5 years ago are not the same thing as today. It's unbelievable, the cost decline on solar panel at the utility scale or at the residential scale over the past 5 years. So what we're doing for technical reasons, like reliability reasons and market reasons, otherwise, by not facilitating the integration of those resources, it's really our choice. The lights aren't going to go out, right? We're structurally competent people in our utilities in the IESO to make sure that doesn't happen. But we'll end up with a more expensive system long-term than our neighbors. And we'll end up with a more rigid system than our neighbors, less able to adapt. And then we may end up with another wave in the future. We have all kinds of political intervention in the system at that point in time because those objectives aren't being met and we're not relatively competing well. I think those are tremendous opportunities. What I do think are barriers, and I could probably go on about that. But,
well, I'll be sure to cut you.
Yeah, that's okay. There's some major ones. I think everyone in this room knows that lack of system flexibility is an issue. Nobody knows that better than the IESO. They are very well aware of this. Obviously, I think storage is going to have to be a part of that solution, but I don't necessarily want a technology choice per se. I do think that the mechanisms, the incentives that we put in place have to recognize flexibility. It needs to be explicitly recognized as a value stream so that it's actually built out. Then you'll see all kinds of response industry on how best to meet those sorts of incentives. The challenge, I think, we have a lot of talk about market renewal in Ontario, and many of those initiatives are very good. They will improve the efficiency of sending a short-run marginal cost signal in the market. They'll do that unquestionably. I think there's still a gap in planning horizons and market signals. We can't forget the importance of long-term thinking and long-term infrastructure. We seem to swing as a pendulum back and forth. So we either have centralized planning decisions that are all about, planning assumptions for the long. We're not paying attention to transparent market signals. The pendulum's sort of swinging back to, well, we should leverage these transparent market signals, which we absolutely should. I think what's getting left off the table is what are the transparent market signals for long-run marginal cost? How are we transparently recognized so the industry can actually adapt? Because the signals that we're sending out now are what will encourage very short-term infrastructure. You may end up with too much technology focus on, say, 5-year batteries because they're really cheap, and you have short-run signals, and then you'll be overexposed on the battery side. So it's about thinking ahead to what these incentives need to be, and they need to be transparent. The other two things that I would mention, if you'll humor me, sorry, I could probably ramble on for a while. the technology shift that's going on, innovation that's underlying this. We're an innovative company in the electricity sector that's actually based in Toronto. Like, that's actually pretty unusual. We're 35 people and growing rapidly. Most of our pipeline, well, pretty much all of our pipeline, is not in Ontario. And it's because other jurisdictions are doing more on the innovation side of things. They are enabling risk to be adapted in various ways, sometimes clumsily, sometimes not the best way, but something that allows the adaptation that even if there's some, 5 megawatts, 100 megawatts of diverse storage infrastructure or things that are going to allow for the grid to be more adaptable in the future and have some diversity in sources to provide the solution, are allowed to happen. I think there are ways of doing that in Ontario, but we really have to engage the regulatory side, the electricity planning side more. And on that regulatory question, I would just point out there are significant regulatory barriers still in place here. I mean, just on the storage side of things, we still have demand charges getting put on the charging side of the storage project, even though it's really providing a service that's clearly sending the wrong signal. I think that there are many lessons to be learned in other jurisdictions from that. Our next project is actually in Australia. On the regulatory side, they have a very interesting model where you can actually rate-base asset that's providing a network benefit and is tied to long-term transmission planning. And then the rest of the asset is actually providing merchant value onto the grid through transparent signals. That is a very, and by the way, Paula Conboy, who many of you would know here, is actually one of the underlying forces, but seem to be exporting even our innovative policy expertise. These types of models and not being sort of internally focused are very, very important. And the last point I would just make in terms of other jurisdictions, I sort of alluded to it in my intro, we have to be thoughtful about how we look at other jurisdictions. What I see, and I may be oversimplifying this, but what I see in market renewal is that we're taking models of power markets, US-style power markets, that are very good at certain things. They're very good at sending Procel generators. That's what they were built for. Those markets are actually collapsing. If you go down to New York and you go down to IESO New England, they're struggling badly to adapt their market to a bunch of distributed energy resources and non-emitting resources that are all going on by pure economics, plus some state intervention. And the markets can't adapt. If you think about the opportunity we have for our electricity renewal right now, all of our costs are already baked into the global adjustment. Like, we could revolutionize the market tomorrow here, and there would be no additional cost on customers that they're having in the U.S. So if we're not thinking big, I'm not sure what we're doing. We should actually be looking ahead long term and figuring out how to take advantage of those two opportunities: the low-cost energy, not getting technological lock-in, and leveraging this electricity sector for future decarbonization.
Thank you for those comments. I'd like to give Michelle an opportunity to respond, and then I am going to go to the floor because the gentleman's been waiting patiently.
Thanks. The piece that, just to add to that, I think, I agree that, to be thought-provoking here a little bit, that this ecosystem wasn't built for speed, and we know that. And I think it's again, we don't need to modernize the grid tomorrow morning, but we need the long view. Absolutely. And we need to continuously, progressively modernize our grids. So we need to free up capital to do that. And that comes from the safe, reliable, efficient piece. But some of that's got to transfer over to the new world. Because we're really good at that safe, reliable, and efficient because that's what we've done for years. And it's robust. We got 99% reliability. We're going to go for 99.1. We've got to take some of that capital and move it over. But when we have discussions about that at the utility, it's a pull haul, and often the safe, reliable, efficient might win. But so it's into that new world faster, but not way ahead of it. But we've got to continue to push that envelope. So the whole ecosystem has got to be bold and lead, and that to me, I think, is probably a more important piece of all this. 90% of the innovation is not technical. It's enabling. They get fertile ground, so when we plant seeds and we want DERs to take, they'll take. But that's up to the people in this room to pull that together. And that includes all of us. So I'm not saying it's an easy slam dunk because it's a complex system, but I really think that we've got to force ourselves to think differently. And strategic partners can help with that. They can make us move faster. They can make us be more connected. They're great marketing engines that can tie on to utilities, more customer-centric. And those are great opportunities. Like, there's ways to get there faster. We don't have to do all this ourselves because we won't. We won't have the whole pie. Sure. But we have to figure out what is our piece of the pie and then move forward. And I was at a conference last year in California, and the best thing I heard said was, I'm not so concerned about who my competition is anymore. I really need to focus on who my strategic partners need to be and get going at that.
Agreed.
Thank you. Do you want?
There's the guy.
Thank you.
There he is. Where'd he go?
I'll just kind of crouch over here all weirdly. The panelists, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate, I think you guys all described, if I'm paraphrasing this maybe a little bit, but jump in if I interpret, that there's a disconnect between the value of DERs represented in the market, because you have a value for the system delivery, and you also have value from an energy perspective, right? And the market may not reflect that. I think you talked about two solutions to that in your presentation. One was rate-basing the asset, partially from a delivery perspective, and the other marginal pricing. Now, if you kind of look at some of the options, if you could expand on that and kind of talk about the social acceptability of the different options for better articulating the value of DERs, I'd appreciate that.
Social acceptability.
I think one that I could add to the two that you put on the table there that's a bit more tangible. When I talk about long-run marginal cost, so that's something that we don't really have a mechanism for that. So the way that that's been done historically is that you'd have some planning through an IPSP or a long-term energy plan, make some decisions, and you'd go out and contract for the resource that might be a 30-year or 40-year resource. And so implicit in that contract is a capacity value. The way they're dealing with it in other markets is they might have explicit capacity pricing or an auction. And that's obviously something that we're looking at here in Ontario. This is another one, though, where I think we have to think a bit bigger. Like, what's the time frame of that price signal? What's the transparency on what really the long-run marginal cost truly is? If we're just incenting capacity on a 4-year forward, or it's a particular year snapshot in time, operationally to do that, but it's certainly not solving the long-term question. And so I think you can bake that in by having a longer planning horizon. But I think what happens is when we do the long-term planning, we tend to not be transparent completely. And we do the merit, but we're not thinking long-term. And so is there a way to do the long-term planning through mechanisms that are really transparent, that the market can respond to, that you know aren't going to change in 3 years, which is a problem for investment?
Yeah. Social acceptability is always that big challenge. It's almost like to operate. And when I look very kind of big picture at the system, I think there's been some great planning to date. I think DERs have maybe moved faster than people have thought, and specific ones like the solar and the energy storage. But I think we have to be mindful of political realities, and I think Julie waved the flag this morning around the stranded assets, and we want to make sure that we right-size the system going forward, because ultimately the politicians are going to look at what is the impact on the residential ratepayer. They're the ones that vote. They scream and yell loud enough. We've seen it multiple times with this last government where people will be big shifts, whether it's partial funding through the tax base or other initiatives that they'll look at. All three political parties here in Ontario said, carrying on either with the Fair Hydro Plan or we're going to have even more. So we're already going into this next regime on electricity, with now our new government saying another 12% reduction on top of the 25%. So it's really complicated, and it's going to remain complicated. I think the joy of a simplified electricity system in Ontario, I'm not sure is entirely reachable. But I do, in more collaboration and bring more voices to the table, have all these important conversations. And I see the infrastructure being set up at the IESO, and I think I'm starting to see more of that actually at the OEB. So I do think having more people at the table with more of these transparent discussions, I think is going to help. But the politics are here, and like I said, we're starting now with government looking for another 12%. So that's the world that we live in. So that's sort of my comment on the social acceptability.
Just a quick one on social acceptability, and I agree. You know, when customers start to see value, just think 5 years from where we are, the Amazons and the Googles are coming into this space fast. Think where we'll be 5 years from now. Customers will see value and they'll go there with or without us.
That's right.
So the days of us controlling that entire future is one to appreciate now rather than control, and partnerships will be critical in how we position for that. I think social acceptance will come down to the value that's generated and created for that end consumer to meet their needs. And as we bundle solutions going forward, keep them simple, keep them real, keep them resolving real people problems, and we'll get social acceptability much faster. And I realize things here, and it's not quite that simple, but it's really important because the customers will ultimately choose, and 5 to 10 years from now, they'll have lots of choices to make. And they may not disconnect. I think they'll still be grid connected. There'll be the network effect. Our business models will evolve to recognize that. But they'll be more autonomous, and their energy experience will be relevant to who they are and what they want. And that they will start to move more and more on their own, with or without us. So the question is, how do we do it with them? So there's great things happening, I agree, and it is the long view, and not necessarily being way ahead of it, but being on as we go forward.
Great, thank you. So I don't see any more questions from the floor, and recognizing that we're running a little bit behind, and I know some of our speakers have a hard stop. They'll be sprinting to their next engagement. So we'll end it here, and thank you very much, panelists, for your participation.
Thank you.
So that does take us to lunch right now. So we will see you back to reconvene at 1 o'clock with a short video that we're going to play just a couple minutes before 1 o'clock. So enjoy lunch.